It Ends With Us was extremely underwhelming.
Your friends wear florals.
I'm sorry, baby. Did we read two different books? Because it seems to me that people have forgotten the message of this damn book.
I am a domestic violence survivor. I saw It Ends With Us. I also read the book, and I can honestly say fully in my bones that nothing has ever portrayed domestic violence in the way that I experienced it so accurately.
Oh my gosh. Now everybody's ganging up against me. For what? What the fuck did I do?
As a victim of sexual abuse, I have processed a lot of my trauma by reading dark romance.
My Roman Empire is all these toxic men on television that we're supposed to love that were actually terrible.
We watch these toxic relationships on TV, we read about them in books, and it's all for the purpose of being entertained.
Bitch, what I was trying to say is this situation got me so wet and so dry at the same time. Exactly.
What's up, bitches? Welcome back to another episode of So Wet, So Dry. I'm one of your hosts, Fiji, like the island, like the water. I've been doing way too much bed rotting and watching YouTube videos, and I work in social media and marketing.
And I am your other host, Autumn, like the season. I've been watching way too much Law and Order SVU that I keep having nightmares, and I work in entertainment. If you guys are new here to So Wet, So Dry, what we do is we explore duality through deep diving topics about sex, relationships, and personal identity, all where internet trends and reality collide. We do post polls for every single episode that we do on our Instagram, so make sure you're following us at So Wet, So Dry. The O's are zeros. We would love to have your voice inputted into that. You can submit a question, comment, story for every single episode that we will read anonymous if you wish every single week. And whatever you're doing right now, make sure that you are subscribed on YouTube, that you like the video, leave a comment. And if you're on another platform, make sure you follow. You can also rate us on platforms like Spotify and Apple. Leave a written review on Apple. It helps us out so much, and it would mean the world to us if you did that.
Yes, and today we are talking about why we romanticize toxic relationships so much in the media. We are, of course, going to talk about the It Ends With Us controversy. We're going to get a little bit into Lana Del Rey and dark romance. And overall, we're going to analyze who is this media for and what is wrong with our culture. We're going to wrap up the end of the episode, as we always do, talking about what we're wet, dry, and still a little bit confused about the topic, because it is okay to still be confused. Now, first, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping, guys. There are trigger warnings in this episode for domestic abuse, sexual assault, grooming, rape, toxic relationships, control, manipulation, pretty much any type of toxic relationship dynamic we will discuss. We're not going to go super deep into graphic details. We are going to have stats. We're going to have academic sources, articles, all of that, but we are talking about these heavy topics. So if you are watching and you have these triggers, please be careful. You don't have to watch. It's okay. I do want you guys to also know that we do have resources for domestic violence, sexual assault, mental health resources, all linked in the bottom of the description of this episode. I do want to also mention the National Domestic Violence Hotline, which is 1-800-799-SAFE or 7233. You can also text START to 88788. And like I said, the rest of the hotlines are linked in the description. So guys, I just want to start by saying that this is a difficult topic for us to cover. This is a topic that is very, very close to my heart, being a domestic violence survivor. And while this topic is mostly focused on the media, we're mostly focusing on books, movies, music, all of that, I do want to say that one of my abusers literally said to me, like, oh, the reason I did this is because I love you so much. Like, this is what they do in the movies, which I thought was insane. Like, that's not true. But people do think that. Like, there's no reason for abuse at all, but our culture does really impact people's beliefs about what's healthy and what's not in relationships.
Right.
So we recognize when we are talking about these things that even though we are talking about the art, the media that is involved in these topics, they have a heavy weight. So I just want to say that as well.
It glamorizes it and normalizes it.
Yes.
You know, and people are like, I see myself in that, and it's not okay.
Yeah.
And for me, I've been in toxic relationships that had a lot of manipulation aspects to them. I've never been in an abusive relationship, but I've had two of my close friends go through one and had to kind of learn. Yeah, you're looking at one of them. And had to learn what to do, how to support, when to kind of back away, and just how to navigate that. My mom is a survivor as well of sexual assault and domestic abuse, and she's dedicated her whole life to giving back to that community and working as a social worker. So she's been educating me since I was 2 years old, I kid you not, on these sort of topics. Obviously, when it was age appropriate, the language changed, but so it's been a big part of my life in terms of the people around me and my family. But for me, you know, the only other thing is like I have been with like a pimp-like individual. I'm laughing because it's uncomfortable, but I have been, you know, and I haven't been truthful to even you about everything that went on when it comes to finances and things like that. So, because it's hard to talk about, obviously. So there was some manipulation there, but, you know, I wanted to do it at the same time. So there's blurred lines. There's a manipulation. Yeah. There's a lot of blurred lines, but we just wanted to say that because, you know, and I was watching a TikTok the other day, like, why are people with relationship podcasts the ones that have like not been successful? But it's like, that's why we never, you know, preach to you guys, this is how to do a relationship, because we don't know. And we've been through shit, as we've just said. So we really hope to educate you guys and heal together as a community about these topics. But again, we're focusing on the media for this episode, not our personal experiences. But it still matters when it's like, who are you getting this information from? We want to be transparent about our lives and experiences with you guys.
Yes, and we are going to talk about the movie It Ends With Us. We are going to give spoilers for the movie as well as the book. Yeah. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to talk about this, but I'm like, you know, being a domestic violence survivor, I'm like, I literally fucking have to, because exactly, it's like, who's going to tell our stories, like, if not for us, and be able to, like, actually critique them. I think that's important. I'm not, like, super recommending the movie, so, like, you don't have to watch it. We're going to give the analysis, like, whatever.
Yeah, we're going to spoil it anyway, so.
Yeah, it's fine. And lastly, we are going to talk about a lot of different types of media that we're not going to get super into. We're going to mention, like, Sex and the City, Euphoria, Gossip Girl, all of that stuff. If there's something in that show, in that book, in that song that you guys really, like, resonate with that we didn't cover, please comment below. We'd like to make the comment section like a safe community to analyze these topics of toxic relationships in the media. So please do that.
And please be kind to one another.
Yes, please.
You can trash us. Y'all do already, but no, I'm just kidding.
Right. And use trigger warnings.
But be nice to each other.
Use trigger warnings too. If you're going to talk about a specific scene or something, like, use a trigger warning.
Yeah.
So we're going to start with the movie It Ends With Us, based on the book by Colleen Hoover. It starred Blake Lively, which we all probably know if we've been on TikTok. We've seen the intense backlash as to the way that she's marketed it. And then we have Justin Baldoni on the other side, who has marketed it more from a point of like advocating for survivors and all of that, which we'll talk about a little bit. But first, I just want to start with this article from NPR. It was released in August, so we can only imagine that the movie has earned more now. But back in August, it had a respectable $242 million worldwide. And then it kind of criticizes the film for not having trigger warnings, which is like a huge criticism throughout like TikTok, people on Reddit, people on YouTube. There were no trigger warnings in the trailer, the movie poster. Which I'm going to put.
So irresponsible.
It's so irresponsible. And like the way that Blake Lively was promoting it, like I'll play the clips right now.
It Ends With Us is in theaters now. So grab your friends, wear your florals, and head out to see it.
Grab your friends, wear your florals, and head out to see it.
What has been the best part in making this particular movie?
I've noticed so many beautiful crystals on teeth. Is that a big fashion thing?
As a man, I'm always going to come with my own biases. And it's one of the reasons I was afraid to direct this movie, let alone act in it. And I wanted to make sure this film always had a female gaze, and I was never putting myself into it. But one of the things that I think is very easy to say, especially for us men, is when we maybe talk to somebody who's in this situation, or we read a book, or we or we hear a news story, the question that's always asked is, why did she stay? And that's the wrong question.
Yeah.
What we need to be asking ourselves is, why do men harm?
There's also been criticisms, like from this NPR article that says framing the movie as a love story can be damaging, particularly to young people who don't have a healthy frame of reference for love and aren't as easily able to recognize the signs of abuse. Quote, if this is common practice and we're constantly presenting love in this way, then for those children who are still developing, it normalizes and desensitizes them to abuse, which we're going to continuously touch on this topic, and we have a whole section about teens closer to the end of the episode, so we're going to come back to that. But I also want to talk about the difference between the movie posters. We have Blake Lively's version is, you know, her as Lily Bloom with these flowers. It has her name very clearly on the poster. And then the other one that Justin Baldoni promoted is more of like, you know, he's on her neck. It looks a little bit more sinister. It has all of their names on it. It's just a little bit more serious. So they promoted it very differently. But the thing is that Blake Lively is not the only person that has been promoting this movie/book in this way. I also went over to Colleen Hoover, the author's website, and she has quite a bit of merch that says things like Lily Blooms, because Lily Bloom, the main character, owns a flower shop. She has sweatpants, hats, sweatshirts, t-shirts. She has a nail polish called
oh my God.
Shimmering Bold Magenta with Lily Bloom's name. She also had tried to launch a coloring book that received a ton of backlash on TikTok, so I think they discontinued that. I don't know if people have noticed that she's done this other stuff. And then Blake Lively followed suit with, you know, promoting her hair products. She was promoting her drinks and stuff, and she monopolized a lot of the interviews with just talking about that. People were comparing it to, like, her wanting to be like Barbie and Oppenheimer with like her husband, Ryan Reynolds' new Deadpool movie coming out or whatever. And there is this YouTube video by the Authentic Observer. I absolutely love her content, called Blake Lively and the Celebrity Self-Obsession Culture, that goes way more deeply into the toxic marketing that was around that. So we're not gonna go super into it, but if you guys want a good video that goes like way deeper, definitely check that out.
That is just absolutely insane. Like, you can't even have anything that says like power to survivors or something like that. That's so fucking weird.
And the one thing that I was thinking, I'm like, okay, like if Lily Bloom was a real person and like she owned a flower shop and people were like celebrating the fact that she's a survivor and wanted to support her business, then I think that's different. But also Colleen Hoover has an estimated net worth of $10 million as of 2024. So she is like very rich. She has made her money. I don't really see a need for her to be creating merch around this book in particular. I know a lot of her other books have received criticism for romanticizing toxic love tropes as well. I haven't read those. We're going to talk a little bit about the book in a minute.
So this is a pattern. For her.
Yeah, so this is like a pattern. I mean, her books are huge on Book Talk. Like, she's a very popular writer right now, and it's usually romance books. It Ends With Us is a little bit different. So I can talk a little bit about the book backstory. So this is the cover of the book, also very flower theme going on.
Mm-hmm.
And Hoover actually describes it as the hardest book she's ever written because the novel concerns domestic violence, and according to Hoover, it was written with the intention of advocating for domestic violence victims. The story was supposedly inspired by her personal experience as a child growing up in a household with domestic violence, which carried through into her adulthood. And she did say, and I forget if it was like the epilogue or the intro of the audiobook, she said, quote, I wanted to write something realistic to the situation my mother was in, a situation a lot of women find themselves in, Hoover writes, saying the book was the most grueling thing she's ever written. I wanted to explore the love between Lily and Ryle so that I would feel what my mother felt when she had to make the decision to leave my father. So she does have personal experience with this. Like, her father was an abusive person. Her mother went through this, which I think makes this like all the more complicated. And I haven't seen that like talked about as much. So I do want to keep that in mind when we are like analyzing the movie. Okay, so to explain the movie, we have Lily Bloom. She is a woman that is supposed to be around 26, I believe, but in the movie they aged her up with Blake Lively. So she bought a flower shop. I believe they're in Boston. She owns this flower shop. She's at the roof of her apartment. She meets this guy named Ryle. Ryle is a neurosurgeon, super charming guy, whatever. He just wants to have sex with her really bad. He's like very sexually attracted to her. She's like, no. She goes to her flower shop. This woman named Alyssa starts working there. Turns out Ryle is Alyssa's brother. So they start all hanging out with Alyssa's fiance, boyfriend, whatever. They're all hanging out. Ryle is continuously pursuing her. He really wants to be with her. She's like, I don't know, whatever. Super romantic, super like swept her off her feet, da-da-da. They're great. Then an incident, and by the way, throughout this, we're like flashing back to her childhood where we see her meet this boy who's around the same age as her, and he's living in this abandoned house across the street from her. And as the movie goes on, you learn that he ran away from his home because his mom was being abused by her boyfriend. And then we also later learn that Lily Bloom's mother was being abused by her father. Okay. So movie continues on. There's this one instance where they're like kissing in the kitchen. Ryle goes to open the oven to take out a hot pan, and he like burns himself and like turns around and like kind of like slaps her while he's like doing this. And it happens so quickly that you don't really know what's going on. It seemed aggressive, but like we don't know. She's on the floor. She has a black eye, but she decides to forgive him. They all go to a restaurant, and we had found in the restaurant earlier when she went with her mom that the boy that's working at the restaurant is the boy from her childhood. Okay, his name is Atlas.
Okay.
And she had a relationship with this boy, Atlas. She like started by just giving him clothes, letting him shower at her place. She kind of was like helping him, taking care of him. He was like bullied at school, like whatever. So they start to have a romantic relationship in her childhood. She loses her virginity to him. But when she lost her virginity to him, her dad came home and caught them and essentially beat the shit out of Atlas. Okay. So this is their history. And then she wasn't allowed to like see him anymore, but she always has this soft place in her heart. So they're at the restaurant. Atlas sees that she has a black eye and meets her like by the bathroom and is like, what are you doing? Like, you need to leave now. Like, you can't end up like your mother. Like, you're better than this kind of thing. Like, whatever. Then Ryle like comes out and sees him, and I forget who started the fight, but they start fighting because Atlas is like, fuck you. You can't do this to her. Ryle is like, what are you saying? Like, whatever. So then Ryle's like, oh, you shouldn't, like, just please don't talk to him. Like, anyone, just please don't talk to him, whatever. So then the movie progresses. There's more instances of abuse. Like, she has a little tattoo that's like a heart right here because of Atlas, and he, like, bites it. He, like, pushes her down the stairs at a certain point. Like, it's really bad. She eventually decides to leave him when things get really bad, and she goes to Atlas's house, okay? And then Atlas takes her to the emergency room where she finds out that she's pregnant with his baby, and they're married at this point. So, but she does decide she wants to leave him. She doesn't want to stay with him, but she's going to keep the baby. So Atlas is kind of like helping her, but he like leaves her to do things on her own and says that like, you know, if you're ever ready for love or you want someone else, like I'm here. Like he's very clearly still in love with her. So so she continues to like, you know, prepare for the pregnancy. Ryle does help her like set up a crib. Like he's helping her prepare, but he's not in her life. I guess in the book, he was like sleeping in a separate room, but they were like still together. They're still married. And then there's the end of the movie, the final scene where she gives birth to the baby. Ryle is there in the like emergency room, birthing room with her. Yeah. And then the baby's born. She lets him hold the baby. And she essentially says like, I want a divorce. What would you do if our daughter ever came to you and was like, I'm being abused? What would you do? And he was like, I would tell her to leave him, like, da-da-da. He, like, kind of is, like, fucked up, sad, but he gets it, and then he walks out the door. He leaves. A year later, we have Lily Bloom with, I think, her mom playing in the park, and they run into Atlas, and you kind of get the idea that her and Atlas are, like, starting their love story now. So there is a sequel. I don't really know what the sequel to the book is like, I don't know if we're going to get a sequel to the movie. The other couple things that I'll say that I know about the book and movie that are different just based off of watching reviews is that one girl said she had no idea that it was about domestic violence because the first half of the book, the first third, was really romanticizing Ryle as this bad boy, but you could see these manipulation tactics and stuff like that. And then about a third way through the book, she was like, oh no, he's actually a bad boy. Like, we're actually painting him as a bad guy and not just romanticizing it. Right. So there's that. And like, obviously the book has more time to cover a lot of ground. And the book is also written from Lily Bloom's perspective versus the movie, which is kind of different. I will say for the parts that I liked about the movie, I did think that when they showed the moments of violence, it was like intentionally fuzzy to kind of like put you in that seat, that position of like, was it bad? Was it not? Like the whole oven situation. And then it like gradually got worse. So I thought that was, well done in that sort of sense. I mean, obviously they didn't have time to like go into the whole way that it happens. We're going to get into the ending in a little bit with the comments and stuff because that's something a lot of people had a hard time with. But do you have any questions?
Well, I think the fuzziness part is good too because like you said, like it's representative of like not really knowing if it is bad or it being like, oh, well, it's not crystal clear that this is abuse. Like there's a question, like there's
was he just
reason
angry?
To doubt.
Like, oh, like he burned his hand. Was this an accident? You know, like you can kind of empathize with why she would like excuse the behavior.
Yeah, and that's like, that's hard to do. So that's good. I mean, honestly, because I haven't seen it, guys. So the way you explained it, like, does make me like intrigued, honestly. Because I feel like with the flashback parts of the film of like her childhood, I feel like there's just like so much abuse going on. Like, with
and that is another thing. The other thing that I forgot to mention, Ryle's brother had died when he was like 6 years old. And apparently it had happened because they were playing with a gun, like their father's gun, and he accidentally shot. He didn't know, like he thought it was a toy. He shot whatever. So like that's supposed to be, I guess, like the backstory as to why like Ryle is like the way he is, which like, you know, a lot of this is like the cycles of abuse, the childhood, how it like happens and all of that. But I still think that there's no excuse for being an abuser just because of your childhood. And the thing that I did like about that is the fact that they had the fact that they had Atlas as the kind of counter male figure who also had a tragic backstory of seeing his mom's boyfriend beat him up, beat her up, but he didn't become that, you know? So I liked that it had that kind of juxtaposition. But we do have a lot of people, and we had one listener story that said, I hated this movie so much, dude. It's awful and such a bad portrayal of domestic violence. So I want to ask you, based off of like what we said about it so far, do you think the movie romanticized abuse?
I mean, I feel like that's why I said I was like, it makes me kind of want to see it. Yeah. Like it did romanticize it a little bit. I think it's like hard coming in. Like I knew all I was like more focused on like the backlash that Blake Lively was getting, where now it's like, I feel like I can't even watch Gossip Girl if I wanted to anymore. Like I don't even want to see her fucking face. But like, I will say, like, especially when it comes to the book, like I've definitely read other books that romanticize whether it was abuse or like mental health conditions. And like, there is sort of this like guilty pleasure feelings around those where it's like, even if you know it's wrong, you still kind of want to read it. And like, they do it that way on purpose, but I don't know. Like, I feel like, I mean, the black eye, I feel like every movie of abuse, it's like you always have a black eye. I would be interested to see, like, maybe if they didn't have a black eye for once, too, because it's like there's so many different ways and you can't always see abuse, even if it is physical. So, like, maybe some of that would have been nice, where it's just like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not bad to have a black eye, obviously, but I don't know. I feel like it's kind of hard for me to like tell if it was
because you didn't watch it. Yeah. And I will say, like, I didn't read the book, but I don't think that it romanticized abuse, honestly. I think the marketing was terrible, but I think, and obviously this is like a fiction. We're going to get into dark romance, which does romanticize abuse and other things, kind of like how you're talking about the guilty pleasure aspect.
Yeah.
But I don't think based off the movie that it did glamorize it, because I think it is a pretty accurate depiction of what it's like for a lot of domestic abuse victims, and the parts of it that's like, oh, we fall in love with Ryle, or we understand why she stays, or we understand why she excuses it. I think it's putting the viewer in the situation of being like who Lily is and how she's experiencing it.
Yeah.
So the parts that are like being romanticized is like her experience because of his manipulation.
Right. Because
it's
like you forget that it's like, well, she did want to be with this person at one point. She doesn't hate him automatically.
Right.
You know? So yeah, that's a really good point. It's like that's how it was for her, you know?
Right.
It shouldn't necessarily be the outsider looking in, but that's how it was for her. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So now we're going to get into what Reddit thinks. And someone posted on Reddit under the romance books thread, it ends with us and the depiction of abuse. I'm writing this because I've seen multiple reviews stating that it ends with us romanticizes abuse, and my question is why? Don't get me wrong, I didn't like this book and I'm not trying to defend it. For me, even before I've read the author's note, it was pretty obvious the book doesn't support abuse. Despite the fact the writing was bad, to put it lightly, the main ideas are clear. Girl falls in love with charming boy. The boy isn't who she thinks he is. He starts abusing her. She struggles, and she breaks up with him, acknowledging the abuse. Personally, I didn't like how the abuse was depicted, but I still don't think it's been romanticized. I might be wrong, so I'd love to hear your opinions. And now let's get into the opinions. So,
but that just made me think too. It's like, honestly, it's like what's romanticizing it is like the flowery cover and like the merch attached to it.
Yeah.
Not necessarily maybe the scenes of abuse.
Well, because people are thinking they're going to just see a rom-com. And I would argue that the story between her and Atlas is a romance.
Yeah.
In some senses. Like, that's the real romance of the story. It's not Ryle.
Because it ends with like, oh, you think that they're like.
Yeah, like he's the good guy and like they have a history and like all of that type of stuff. But like it is a survivor story.
Yeah.
You know, so it's not really like, I like if it was like a real person and they wanted to focus on the fact that she's a survivor and they wanted to focus on her and not like, I don't know, then maybe I would get like it being more about her and flowers. But like for this, it just didn't make sense. Like people don't know. There's no media story. There's no preconceived idea of this character. Like it's not like that.
Yeah. But okay, someone commented under this thread and said, for all my peeves with the book, I don't think it outright romanticizes abuse. I do think the idea that Ryle will never abuse their daughter is a scary idea to put out there. The book ending with him having unsupervised access to a kid and Lily having to still be in contact with her abuser left a bad taste in my mouth, but I do think she portrayed domestic abuse without romanticizing it. Someone responded to that and said, I volunteer for Women's Aid Organization, and the way the ending was chilling, I can't tell you. Ryle being allowed unsupervised time with child after incredibly violent episodes. Ryle being allowed to continue his professional career as he isn't a doctor who could pose a threat to society. I don't jive with my professional experiences of such men. There are a lot of books that romanticize abuse and a lot of romance books who romanticize abuse, but I don't think this one does. But it does fetishize women's suffering to a grotesque degree. This isn't unique. Our whole culture fetishizes women's pain. And someone else said, I don't believe it romanticized abuse either. But as someone who had a very abusive father, he never even raised his voice with me. He always had unsupervised visits with me as well. And my mom even had a cordial relationship with him until I was 18. I'm not saying this because I think my dad has a good side. He wasn't a good father. He wasn't a good father or partner. And I thank God every day my stepdad raised me. I say this because not all abusers get the justice they deserve. Unfortunately, that's reality. By the time I was in my teens, you'd think my mom and dad were friends and you'd never know their DV history. Unfortunately, it's not all black and white, and the idea that Ryle is going to abuse their daughter is a very gray area. I think the whole book is reality, which is what readers have a problem with. Interesting. People on Reddit going crazy. Okay. Someone else said, speaking as a battered... No, because just the way they're saying, like I wouldn't have even thought that. Maybe that's because I'm not a survivor, but it's like the way that, it's like, well, he was just alone with the child. Obviously, he's going to do that to the children again. But I guess my thought is like, maybe, but like, I do think sometimes it's like, what type of predator is he? Like, maybe he's not a pedophile. He likes to abuse women his age, you know? And it's not just like a, yeah.
And it's like, I don't think to have a survivor story, we need a happy, perfect ending, because that's not reality. And so often the narrative around women who are abused by their partner is, why didn't she leave? Why did she stay?
Yeah.
Why is she still with the father? Why does the father have access to the kid? And yes, that's not right, and it isn't okay. And maybe the father will go on to abuse the kid. I mean, Colleen Hoover's father was abusive, and I guess wasn't towards her. But the thing is that, like, this is real, like, and this is a lot of people's experiences. And like, I get it's a movie, so we all want to like pull apart, like, oh, he shouldn't have been able to hold the child, like at the end, like, this is so terrible, which I think we have a comment that might be about to say, or the one that said earlier.
Yeah.
But the thing that pisses me off is it's like, yeah, because he has manipulated her and abused her so badly that like she is in a very difficult position. And like, you getting mad at her is you also blaming the victim. Like, we should want better for her, but we should think about how this plays out on camera, how it makes you feel, and then how you're also treating people in real life, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because no survivor story is perfect. No survivor story is the same. All of that stuff, you know?
And they all don't get a happy ending. In fact, a lot of them don't.
Yeah.
You know, and I think the way the Reddit person said it, it's like, it's not black and white. There's gray areas. I think that's a perfect way to say it too.
Yeah.
Okay, so someone else said, speaking as a battered woman and survivor of DV, the romanticized part is that the woman was not murdered. He apologizes and they remain friends. Give me a break. In reality, abusers kill their victims. I'm lucky to be alive today. And that book in no way reflected my experience or those of people I've talked to in survivor groups. Someone replied and said, there's not one single experience of abuse. I'm no fan of Hoover, but she has seen domestic abuse firsthand, and I think it's unfair to dismiss that because it didn't touch your experience. In reality, a lot of abusers are exactly like Ryle, and they get away scotch-free. A lot of victims will remain on friendly terms with their abusers when there's kids involved. It felt pretty close to my experience, if I'm honest. There's some gross parts, but I'd blame it more on Hoover not having the writing skills than from ignorance or malice for the most part. Damn, they're really hating on her writing skills.
Yeah.
But I feel like, you know, in the few domestic abuse, sexual assault school assemblies that I had in high school, it is like, the last step is that they kill you. And I think, like, of course, that's true for so many, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But there isn't just one type of abuse, you know? And it's like, those deserve to be represented as well, even though how horrible and tragic. And it's like, it's okay if you don't see your abuse shown in this one film about DV. It sucks. You know, if there were more honest portrayals, maybe it wouldn't feel so like, oh, but that wasn't my experience. Yeah. Because it's like, this was my one shot to have, you know, something representative.
Some representation, yeah.
Which sucks. I mean, that is a whole other thing within itself. But
exactly.
I think that, and it's like but like, she wasn't killed by him, but now she has to go the rest of her life with him and her child and like feeling that out. You know, it's like a different type of pain too. It's like he's still around, like, it's like the ghost of her past life and like her trauma, it's still there, you know?
Yeah, and we shouldn't have to see her be killed to take it seriously. And I understand that this is like a survivor of domestic violence that's saying this. And I do want to say, like, throughout, like, me being a survivor, like, it warps your perspective on certain things. Like, I think at times I've had less empathy for other women who have had experiences that were different than mine with TV. Like, there is some victim blaming in that because you're projecting what you've been through. Like, you're not always the most, like, reliable person about it. Like, it's easier looking in and, like, looking at it from, like, an academic, like, psychology perspective, all of that, than, like, when it's your own brain that's, like, trauma warped.
You can't separate yourself from it. You don't have the privilege of, like, intellectually analyzing this media without thinking about what actually happened to you, you know?
Yeah.
And that is normal and that is all okay. But yeah, I think that's a really good point to bring up. It's like sometimes it's like you're just not capable of like seeing the full picture. And it's tragic. Like it's horrible, you know?
Yeah. But that's trauma brain. So
that's trauma brain, yeah. Okay, so someone else said, and their name is Autumn. What's up?
Hey.
It never, ever romanticized abuse. It just showed the abuser as a human. Abusers aren't trolls who lurk in the shadows. Okay, that's tea, though. That's
huge.
Why I think Baby Reindeer was, like, also good to show that it's, like that woman, like, from the outside, like, okay, I'm not gonna.
No, but, like, he had a soft...
seemed...
Yeah. No, and he had a soft spot for her. Like, that is what abusers and manipulators do. And that is what is so difficult in being in it, because everyone tells you, like, oh, he's a bad person. Like, if he does this to you, he's an abuser. He's a terrible person, da-da-da-da. And what you almost need to hear is, like, no, he is a good person in these ways, but he's also bad, and that's not okay. And so I think showing that, like, hello, like, abusers have redeeming qualities. That's what makes you fall in love with them.
And it's okay. Yeah, and it's okay that you're attracted to your abuser or you fantasize about your abuser after it's happened. Like, all of those things are so normal. And it's like, what other people, it's like they don't love them. And that's like when you were going through your relationship, I was always like, well, she loves him. I don't. Like, she's not going to look at it that way. I feel nothing towards that fucking man. And she loves him. And it's like, that's what helped me able to recognize, like, well, what if someone that you've loved in your relationship did that? Like, I would have been fucked. So
exactly.
I can understand a little bit in that way. But yeah, it's like they really are always shown as lurking in the shadows with a baseball cap on, like kind of how What's-His-Face from You is in his little outfits walking around in the night.
But then they show his redeeming qualities and stuff like that as well. And that's the hard thing about depicting this type of stuff, because it's
so hard.
You almost have to... The, like, creator almost has to make you in some ways fall in love with this person or develop empathy for the character who's going through this, because that is how these situations go down. Like, it's different, you know, in terms of, like, if we're talking about kidnapping or if we're talking about rape in certain instances, like, those are different. But when it comes to, like, intimate partner stuff and even grooming, it's like you have to, like, get how that dynamic is going on.
And if you're trying to show it from the survivor's perspective, it's like, how do you, like, she doesn't hate him right now. Like, that's how we got here. And it's like, you have to show that, like, she's like, there were parts about him. She wasn't just like, oh, this guy's crazy, I'm gonna fall in love with him. You know, that's the whole fucking thing. But it is really hard, because you have people that can't relate and they're like, well, why the fuck did you make this guy? So why do we want to fuck him? You know?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Abusers aren't trolls who lurk in the shadows waiting for their next victim. They're just people. It's not funny. We're so like that. We're good. By showing Ryle as a full person with good qualities too, it did justice for the topic. Everything else I've read or seen just made the abuser an over-the-top villain, and it was ridiculous. As an abuse victim, I really appreciate It Ends With Us. The whole point is thinking it is a standard romance. Falling for him and then being abusive to you, like Lily, are like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And then someone said, most books that depict an abusive partner portray the abuser as a one-dimensional monster, which is not what we see with Ryle. I think some readers are confused by this, and they're kind of missing the point that the book is to show how complex this is. and why it can be so hard for someone to walk away from that kind of abuse. Someone responded to that and said this: I was partially through the book and actually hoping he would get his shit together, that this time would be the last time he lashed out. And then I realized the book was making me relate to a woman in that situation who doesn't immediately realize she needs to leave because it will only get worse. Once it dawned on me, my attitude towards him was, fuck this dude, I hope he ends up in jail. When I finished it, I was a little numb and sat there processing it all. I've never been in an abusive relationship, and I've always found it difficult to understand why someone stays with an abusive partner. This book made some things click. People on Reddit are fucking smart as hell, bro.
Popping off right now.
Like, that's so, like, the way, like, she's like, I never understand why someone would stay, but, like, this helped make some things click. She's like, why am I romanticizing this person? Oh, wait, it's because they're doing that on purpose. And it's like, yeah, it's like, sympathy for the abuser in film and books is like weird, and it's different than real life. Like, if you see a trial on the news and this guy's a pedophile, it's instantly fuck him, because it should be, you know?
Yeah, because you have like, the full context and you're
it's real life, you know, it's real life. And then it's like, even though a lot of these are based on real life too, but it's like with a movie, it's like you do find yourself sympathizing a little bit more with them, which isn't like a bad thing because you have the abuse cycle.
Yeah, I think the creator like intends it to be that way. And there is a dark side of that, because there were a bunch of like women, I would say mostly like younger girls, that were making like Ryle edits and being like, I'm a Ryle apologist and like all of this stuff. And that to me is really dark. Like, that to me is like, I don't know what you've been through to like make you feel that way. Like, I don't want to blame victims or anything like that, because you could be in the situation that's causing you to think that way. I think it's super dangerous, and they miss the point of the movie.
Yeah, it's just not like complexly thought about.
Right.
And so it's just kind of like off-putting. But also, it's like, do we blame them? They're just young people watching what's out there. Right. So it's complicated. Yeah.
And there were no trigger warnings, and it wasn't.
Yeah. There was nothing. Yeah.
Right. But I do want to like discuss the question, like, so who the fuck is this book and movie for? Because we know Colleen Hoover wrote it as, you know, she wanted to advocate for domestic violence victims and or survivors and their experiences and show that story. But is it for DV survivors? Is it for people who blame the victim? Is it for men to understand how they should be more like Ryle or more like Atlas and less like Ryle? Is it for romance lovers? Is it for impressionable teens? Is it for women who romanticize toxicity? And I just want to say, like, as someone who is a survivor of domestic violence, I don't think it's for me. Because it's like, I watched the movie like, duh. Like, I'm watching it like, okay, yeah, duh, we shouldn't blame her. Okay, yeah, it's complicated. Okay, yeah, it makes sense that the scene at the end with the baby and she has him hold him. Like, you know, like, does it make sense as someone who isn't going through that? Yes. But you being in that position, your brain is warped. You've been through trauma. This is someone manipulating. Like, it all makes sense. Yeah. So me watching it, it's like, it's not... I don't think it's for DV survivors or people who have been through it, besides maybe to be like, oh, there is this media that's providing a narrative that's similar to my experience to educate other people, I guess. Yeah. But part of me finds it, I don't know, because part of me is like, there should be content like this to be educational, even though this one was done wrong with the marketing. But the other part of me feels like sometimes it is fetishy, because like, why does it take you this much to understand or to not victim blame? Like, do you have to have this like emotional experience where you're almost manipulated in the theater watching this because you're like relating to Lily for like, you to get it, you know? Yeah. But I'm like, is that better than them not getting it at all? So like, who is this for, you know?
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, it's like, so Colleen experienced things firsthand watching her parents. So it's like, I'd like to think that she wanted to be she wanted to give representation to survivors, whether they could relate, they couldn't, but she hopefully like wanted to do that and like heal through her own shit, through art and writing and all of that. But I think like the Reddit person said, like, this book made things click for me. Like, we didn't really get anyone, like you just said, saying, like, I saw myself in this necessarily, like, all the way. So maybe it was for, like, the general public that doesn't understand and, like, hasn't been in one to, like, understand a little bit more. And I think same thing with Baby Reindeer. It's like, not all abuse looks the same. Like, yes, women are abusers. Yes. Like, you know, like that.
Stalking is a thing, and like the cycles of abuse.
Right. And the police will tell you they can't do anything. Like, all of that shit is like, so I think, like, I mean, but then it's like, you think about the marketing piece, and it's like, I do kind of think impressionable teens there, but I would only think that with the merch and the cute little flower sweatshirts that, like, people would eat the fuck up. Like, it's cute merch. And people, like, before all this loved Blake Lively. Like, young people love Gossip Girl and, like, rewatching that whole era. So I think that would, like, reel them into this too. But yeah, I think it's mostly for people who blame the victim. I don't know about men necessarily. Like,
I don't think, I mean, it was marketed to all women. So it's like,
I don't know about men.
Even
but it's
though
like
Justin Baldoni tried to be like, you know, this is like an issue that opened my eyes and we need to talk about survivors. And I feel like he tried to key men in, but the way it was marketed was not like that at all. And I do also think, like, it is a romance, and the one part about it as a survivor that I did kind of like was the story with her and Atlas, because I feel like being a survivor of domestic violence and having, like, trauma and PTSD and all of these things, you sometimes think, like, how am I ever going to have a healthy relationship with someone who, like, gets it and validates my experience and doesn't see me as broken and, like, all of those things. So, like, and having a man who's been through shit not turn out that way. So, like, if it had been maybe framed more around their romance, like, I guess it's a romance too, because it's like, part of me is like, okay, that's good to show, because, like, DV survivors deserve to have, like, a romance plot as well, considering their history too. So I don't think it's as bad as everyone said. Like, I don't know. So I guess that part, I'm like, maybe it did do something for me.
I guess, like, maybe, like, it would have, like, been better to, like, pick actors that, like, are survivors too. I don't know Blake Lively's story, but I think that like might have, like, why her?
And,
like,
younger too, because the actual characters were younger. Like, they aged them up.
Aged them
and
up.
they focused way too much on the clothes, and, like, it wasn't like
But I do think, like, for women who romanticize toxicity, like, that's like a lot of women. Like, me included at times.
Same.
Like, I'm unlearning it. Like, I'm trying. I literally haven't talked to anyone in over a year because I'm like, I'm not ready. Like, I feel like I don't know how to do this whole relationship thing. So, yeah, because it's like, why did you go so viral? Like, why do these shows go so viral? Is it because people want to uplift survivors? Or is it because of that, like, guilty pleasure watch? Like, thank God I never went through this. Thank God my daughter didn't go, you know? Like, making people feel better, like their lives aren't that bad. Like, that sort of thing. I don't know.
Yeah, and what is the purpose? And we're going to get into that a little bit more later when we talk about dark romance, because I think it is interesting when it's, like, art and the sensationalization of it, and also, like, true crime. Why do women like true crime so much? But we're gonna kind of peel back those layers in a little bit and get into more of the romance genre. But first, I want to get into romanticizing toxic relationships in the media in general. So since we're going to talk about if some of these types of media are glamorized and normalized, first I just want to go through some definitions just so we have a baseline idea of
everyone's
what these
on the
words
same
mean.
page.
Right. Like, I know we probably know, but just in case, we're going to go over it. So glamorized, according to Cambridge, these are all from Cambridge Dictionary, means to make something seem better than it is and therefore more attractive. Romanticize is very similar, to talk about something in a way that it makes it sound better than it really is, or to believe that something is better than it really is. And then lastly, we have normalize, to start to consider something as normal or to make something start to be considered normal. And I think that there's a distinction. Glamorize and romanticize are kind of pretty similar. But normalized is a little bit different. So like, let's just think about that.
And romanticize is like, you know, a little bit maybe more so about love. You know, glamorized could be more so about like looking a certain way, the colors.
Yeah, I think romanticize is kind of in between glamorize and normalized.
And when you put all those three together, bitch,
right, you got what's going on.
Yeah. So, but we asked you guys the poll. Do you think culture normalizes toxic relationships? And an overwhelming majority of 92% said yes, and only 8% said no. And like for the 8% that said no, I don't know, bro. Like that's crazy to me because I think it's like so fucking bad.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's like what we're saying. It's like it's hard to depict these things because people are going to take it different ways. So even if it is an accurate representation, you'll probably still get people saying it's romanticized because our culture's done it for so long in all these fucking movies, even if it just comes to age and like that's rape if you have a 15-year-old with it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so it goes back deep, and I think it's just getting worse with like all the new, you know, HD streaming services, all this shit. It's like seen a lot more. So I think 100%, yeah, bro.
Yeah, same. And I think like this type of media that we're going to be talking about a little bit more, especially with the shows and movies, it's like these are shows and movies about other things, or it is a romance that like makes things that are bad, like manipulation, seem like super normal, and there's no trigger warning, and they end up happily ever after, and it's like a little bit weird.
Right.
So the types of toxicity are including, but not limited to, domestic violence, sexual assault, grooming, stalking, control, manipulation. There's so many more. But some of the shows and movies that kept coming up when I did research, which, by the way, guys, we have all the sources linked in our description. There were quite a lot for this episode. We didn't include all of them. I know, poor Autumn, when you make the doc, but there's definitely a lot. So if you guys like, if there's something we touch on but you want to know more, there's probably an article for it in the sources. So we have Pretty Little Liars, Gossip Girl, Twilight, Euphoria, The Devil Wears Prada, Saltburn, You, Malcolm and Marie, Beauty and the Beast, 50 Shades of Grey, The Breakfast Club, Grease, The Notebook, Romeo and Juliet, Harley Quinn and the Joker, After, Sex and the City, and so many more. We also have music.
Twilight, like, can we just let Twilight be, guys? I love Twilight.
And Twilight is a romance, which we're gonna talk about. Like,
but that movie's crazy. Like, he watches her sleep.
That's what kept coming up. Yeah,
but I love those movies.
Yeah.
Anyways. Yeah,
and
but
I think
Harley Quinn and the Joker's been a big one in recent years too, with all the TikTok sounds, like really romanticizing her.
I've romanticized that.
It's Margot Robbie, like she's hot. Like I get it, but it's a lot.
It's
I know, I have too.
Relationship. He pushed her into a pool of acid. Like he like made her his little bitch while he was going on all, and then she, you know, eventually leaves him and whatever. And we have the Poison Ivy arc where she becomes gay, which we love. But yeah, I think like The Notebook, which The Notebook on here, that's a movie that I loved growing up. Like Nicholas Sparks, like I thought they were like cute as fuck, but there is some like weird shit like why are they screaming at each other? Like he's like grabbing her, like he was like threatening to fall off the Ferris wheel. Like this is not normal behavior, but we just see it and we're like, oh my God, he loves her like so much. Like this is like what a guy should do if he loves me.
And Beauty and the Beast is tea, because I'll be so honest, I never looked at that movie like that, but yeah, he's a literal beast that locked her up.
He kept her captive.
Like, what? Yeah, and we're like, oh, but I love the Beast. He's just misunderstood.
And then he would like get angry and like throw shit, and we're just like, oh,
and like,
it's
why did I
want to
fuck him? Yeah,
right? Like, why do we think that that's attractive? And we're gonna talk about like why women find that attractive in a little bit, but like off camera, Autumn and I were talking about how we think Euphoria isn't the worst representation of like drug abuse, like domestic violence, like mental health, like sexual assault, grooming, like all of those things, because like it showed the bad parts of it. Could there have been trigger warnings? Yes. Did everyone in the cast happen to be hot as fuck with good style that causes us to glamorize it even more? Yes. But like, there were parts of that show that it was like, okay, like it's not just like roses and rainbows. Like this shit is really having negative impacts and like trauma on all of the characters. So
Yeah, because there's a lot going on in Euphoria. You have camming situations, sex work, you have drug abuse, you have abusive relationships. It was like crazy. And Sydney Sweeney's like tits were out in one of the scenes. Like it was a lot.
And it's almost like too much. Like it's almost like, and people would always say like, oh, it's high schoolers. Why couldn't they have been college people? And like, why do we always have like older adults playing teenagers? Does it always have to be in high school? Like that kind of thing is a little bit. And also it doesn't necessarily make it a good show just because there is some sort of like trauma or violence going on. But I don't think, you know, Euphoria didn't get great towards the end of the seasons and stuff. But like, I don't think it was that bad.
I don't think it was that bad either. But yes, I do agree with the actors being older. Like that did, not Euphoria, because I wasn't a teen during that time, but Pretty Little Liars. I used to feel so bad about myself. How the fuck did they look like that? Like I tried to like copy their looks.
Yes,
like
their
literally,
style
I'm
was
so
like,
serious.
I remember them being in, maybe, was it
like
17
they were
magazine?
everything.
Or
to
like,
me.
they were like Cosmo, like they were like so hot, and they were a girl group of friends, which like you
like,
want.
Come on,
bro.
Yeah, so that shit. But Euphoria, I don't know. I think aside from that, and I do think a lot of this shit does go down in high school, as sad as it is. I mean, teens are struggling, like whether it's Drew's or abuse, whether it's drugs or abuse. They're struggling and they deserve that representation. I just think it gets overshadowed because it's like no one believes that they're really in high school. I mean, come on.
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's like, why do they do that? I don't know. I mean, it's just like TV. But if you get past that, I do think a lot of the scenes are really hard to watch because they do feel so real. And I think they are, you know, representative of some things for sure. I don't really demonize that show.
Yeah, I don't either. And I feel like, I don't know.
And the trans experience, I mean, what didn't it cover? Holy
It
shit.
had everything. Yeah, like camming, trans experience. You had pedophiles. You had...
Oh, yeah, because the dad ended up... Yeah, I'm like, the plot is kind of loose, but yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot going on.
And you have backstabbing of your friend. Your best friend hooks up with your abuser. And like, yeah. It's a lot.
Yeah. And then we also have music I just want to talk about a little bit. Like, we're not going to super get into it, but people talk about all the time how music like over-sexualizes things. It romanticizes violence. I think on the men's side, when we talk about like gang violence and killing people, like the younger generation of like 15-year-old boys right now, like drill music and all of that stuff very much romanticizes like murder and a lot of that stuff. It also romanticizes violence against women. You know, just that is like a whole thing. But also a lot of love songs romanticize toxic relationships. Like even Rihanna has been criticized for like the ways that she's written. So I think like Love the Way You Lie and like Eminem.
That song, I remember like when I was little, my mom was like, turn it the fuck off. Like that song is so hard for me to listen to this day. Like it's actually with what happened, like you can't, like it's not like I hate that song, bro.
I know, but we're gonna get into like being a survivor and
that's
having
her
gone
art.
through these
like
things. Where are the lines with Lana Del Rey, who we're gonna talk about in depth. But first, we have a listener story that says, I blame Taylor Swift. That's the way I loved you for my toxic relationship, which is very real. Like when you're a teen and you're impressionable and you're listening to these love songs and this is your idea of love and you relate to this song, you're like, oh, this is normal. I love Taylor Swift. She went through this. I'm going through this. It must be right. And we are going to talk about like teens later in the episode, so I don't want to like, too much, but...
Like, with music artists, too, it's like, there gets to a point, it's like, you start off, you're making music, but then it's like, there comes a point where it's like, you then have a responsibility, or do you, you know?
Right.
Like, you can't sing about your trauma anymore, because how's it going to affect the young girls? Like, it feels like policing it a little bit. But at the same time, it's like, Yeah, like you do have a responsibility. Like you want the 1 million hits dollars, then that's what comes with it. It's like you're worldwide at this point.
Right.
So you can't really, so that's
or give an
sad.
interview about the deeper meaning of the song, or like, or should artists just be able to create art? And like, cause sometimes I feel like, as a survivor, I don't want to have to like explain shit to people or talk about stuff or whatever. Like I should be able to create art that other survivors can understand. So it's so complicated, but we're going to get into Lana Del Rey, which I think is a perfect example of this. Very controversial. And Lana Del Rey has been numerously accused of glamorizing abuse. And a lot of feminists have come after her, a lot of men as well. She gets it from both sides. And she has defended herself against these accusations with this post on Instagram that you guys might remember. I'm going to read it in a minute. And her lyrics frequently address unhealthy relationships, if you guys have never listened to her, and being seduced by controlling or foreboding characters. Some songs include My Man is an Old Man. She sang on Off to the Races, while her boyfriend on Ultraviolence used to call her DN, that stood for Deadly Nightshade. Because I was filled with poison. And I do want to just preface this with parts of this are problematic, which we're about to talk about in a minute.
Okay.
But she says, question for the culture. Now that Doja Cat, Ariana, Camila, Cardi B, Kehlani, Nicki Minaj, and Beyonce have had number ones with songs about being sexy, wearing no clothes, fucking, cheating, etc., can I please go back to singing about being embodied, feeling beautiful by being in love, even if the relationship is not perfect, or dancing for money, or whatever I want, without being crucified or saying that I'm glamorizing abuse? I'm fed up with female writers and alt singers saying that I glamorize abuse when in reality I'm just a glamorous person singing about the realities of what we are all now seeing are very prevalent, emotionally abusive relationships all over the world. With all of the topics women are finally allowed to explore, I just want to say over the last 10 years, I think it's pathetic that my minor lyrical exploration detailing my sometimes submissive or passive roles in my relationships has often made people say I've set women back hundreds of years. Let this be clear. I'm not a feminist, but there has to be a place in feminism for women who look and act like me. The kind of woman who says no, but men hear yes. The kind of woman who are slated mercilessly for being their authentic, delicate selves. The kind of women who get their own stories and voices taken away from them by stronger women or by men who hate women. I've been honest and optimistic about the challenging relationships I've had. Newsflash, that's just how it is for many women. And that was sadly my experience up until the point that those records were made. So I just want to say it's been a long 10 years of bullshit reviews up until recently. I've learned a lot from them. But I also feel it's really paved the way for other women to stop, quote, putting on a happy face and to just be able to say whatever the hell they want in their music. Unlike my experience where if I even expressed a note of sadness in my first two records, I was deemed literally hysterical as though it was literally the 1920s. Anyway, none of this has anything to do about much, but I'll be detailing more of my feelings in my next 2 books of poetry. Yes, I'm still making personal reparations with the proceeds of my books to my choice of Native American foundations, which I'm very happy about. And I'm sure there will be tinges of what I've been pondering in my new album, which comes out September 5th. And then she's happy quarantining. And before we discuss it, in recent years, the singer has distanced herself from some of her earlier lyrics and even removed a song from Cola because of its references to a Harvey Weinstein-like figure. Speaking to Pitchfork in 2017, she recoiled at the mention of the line, quote, he hit me and it felt like a kiss, also from the track Ultraviolence. I don't like it. I don't sing that line anymore. Quote, having someone be aggressive in a relationship was the only relationship I knew. I'm not going to say that that lyric was 100% true, but I do feel comfortable saying what I was used to was difficult, tumultuous relationships, and it was because of me. It wasn't because of me. It didn't come from my end. And I also just want to say, because I feel like no one knows this or recognizes this, but He Hit Me and It Felt Like a Kiss is actually a song written by Jerry Goffin and Carole King for the girl group The Crystals under the guidance of Phil Spector in 1962.
He hit me and it felt like a kiss. Like, that's messed up. There's only a certain percentage of people that would understand what that's about. Most people would be like, how dare you promote domestic violence? But to me, I'm like, I know what you mean.
So like that lyric, Lana Del Rey did not write. It was from like previous music artists. Like it was a whole song before that happened. And I also just want to acknowledge like Lana Del Rey has appropriated Native American culture. The beginning of this note is terrible because she's comparing herself to Black women and acting like she had it so much worse than them when like we know how the industry has treated Black women and over-sexualizes them and deems their music as like not important and pushes them down on the charts. Like she is centering herself as a white woman in this, and there was no need to mention any of them or put herself as some sort of martyr before them. Also, I don't love the idea that she's not a feminist and claims that she's not, but like she's also saying, you know, is there space in feminism for women like me, which I think is a valid argument. But she's put down feminists in the past, and like because a lot of feminists have criticized her work, and like everyone's feminism is different. There's intersectional, there's sex positive, there's so many, like we say all the time, we can't even umbrella term it as feminism anymore because there's so many different types.
Yeah.
But what do you think about this? Because it's complicated, but like I feel like part of her has a point, and I'm someone who always loved her music growing up, even before domestic violence relationships. Maybe her music caused me to romanticize it or glamorize it before those experiences.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, you think about Lana Del Rey and you think about the sad emo Tumblr era. I wasn't someone that, the song that I really ate up was Lust for Love or Lust for Life with The Weeknd or something. Holy shit. Like I choreographed a whole routine to that one day when I was stripping, like whole thing. Like, so yes, but I didn't listen to her music religiously. I feel like she's someone that has fans that are like diehards, kind of like Taylor Swift. Like she's not as big, but I don't know. I feel like people have like wanted to protect her a lot, maybe like her fans, which makes her feel like this is like, but I'm going to be so honest. Like I didn't even peep that most of the artists she named were people of color and like acting like now that they've done it, can I have my moment? Like, that's like,
and they're
really
doing different things. Like,
right. Like,
she's
what?
like them being like, okay, dressing provocatively. Lana, you didn't start that movement.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, she's taking claim for a lot of stuff that wasn't her. Do I think that as a white woman who's reclaiming submissiveness, talking about abuse and being submissive, she received a different type of backlash in a lot of senses? Yes. But it's not comparable to their stuff. And I would argue that it's not as bad. But I do think the criticism that she received is something to talk about because she has been through these abusive relationships. She's creating art about it. And like, why are we so comfortable with so many music artists, rock bands, punk bands, metal bands, rap artists, R&B even, men talking about abusive relationships, like apologizing or even promoting violence and all of that stuff, and we can't get a woman talking about these things? And she has like a very like sad romantic vibe to her, but like there is the sadness undertone and the romanticization undertone that is similar to like a woman that's going through this stuff. Like she's romanticizing it because she's trying to make better of the situation that she was, you know what I'm saying?
And the emotions are real. Yeah. And I don't think she should have been criticized for that. And like, even like the line, like, he hit me and it felt like a kiss, like as like horrible that is, like, I don't know, part of me feels like she should have had the space to say that. Because like that is like, you know, that was normal for her. And like, that's what all of the like love and romanticization mixed with the abuse like made it feel like for her at the time. And it goes back to what we said, like, where is that line of like having the responsibility not to trigger people or have young girls like romanticize abuse, but also be able to tell your truth. You know, it's like, were artists meant to be role models, or were they meant to just write and like have their art represent their own experiences?
Yeah, because I would argue that like that line, which is from like a previous song and like some of this stuff, is radical because it's like, okay, like you look at that like what the fuck, but that's literally the experience of survivors, because it's like, okay. And then also when we think about the predominant culture, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, but it's like men, their emotions are repressed. They're not like allowed in patriarchy to be soft and all of these things. And there is like a kind of epidemic, I think, of men expressing their love and violence, and that it's not love. And like I said with the guy that I was talking about that abused me, it's like he's saying like, I did this because I love you. Like this was so much love in me that it's coming out in anger and hitting you. And like for you to be in that situation where you're like so exposed to someone loving you and abusing you, you're like, oh, this act of anger and violence towards me is because they love me so much. Like, it's like a kiss. Like, you know what I'm saying? Because they're warping your brain. Yeah. And so much of like masculine. So it's like, I don't know. Like, I think it's so hard for people to conceptualize that haven't been through it. And like, that is why it's like, you know, media literacy, all of these things. Like, how deep do people need to go? Like, should she have trigger warnings for her songs? Like,
right. And it's not so black and white. It's not maybe all that the hit felt like with just a kiss. But it's like that layer is in there. Like, you can also be scared too and like fearful for your life, but also be like, this person is doing all of this. He got mad because he cares and like he loves me.
Right.
And like whether or not the media glamorizes that or not, like I would argue there's going to be an aspect of that there because we're not taught otherwise really, unless you have a family member that works in it or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, I don't know. I think there should be space for her to like say that line. I do.
Yeah. And we're going to get the opinion of someone else in this next article.
So this article is called Lana Del Rey's Complicated History of Controversy and Glamorizing Violence. An ASU research assistant professor explains how Del Rey's music glorifies domestic abuse. It's important that people have an ability to contextualize how the violence came to be in the relationship, said Megan Lindsay, research assistant professor at the School of Social Work. If there's a simplification of characters, especially of victims, where an artist makes them to be very one-dimensional and submissive, it's misleading. Victims of violence are much more aggressive than they are portrayed in the media. They're afraid, but that doesn't mean they don't lash out. In the context of Del Rey's work, women in her songs are made to be submissive and simple. Del Rey has labeled herself a submissive woman. That line from Ultraviolence is provocative because it implies that she likes being abused. It's not only problematic, but it's just not true. Most people experiencing violence hate it, she said. Fiji?
I hate this. I mean, the argument that like most women like fight back or whatever, it's like I like that I like that she says that, but I also hate it because I think that's a narrative that we also don't want to acknowledge. There were points in my abusive relationship when I did fight back and like get crazy and like push him back and like scream as well because it's like so much and like I was sick of just like taking it.
Yeah.
So like, yes, like survivors do that, but there was also another relationship I was in where I was very submissive. Like I had already been through it and I was like tired. Like I just would leave the room. Like I would just be like, yes, like you're right. Like I'm sorry, like whatever. So like to just say that that's like simple and submissive and women aren't like that. Like that's not true. Some women are.
Yeah.
And also the argument that like women don't like it, they hate it, like invalidates Lana Del Rey's experience because it's like when you are being abused in that mindset, in that environment, in that relationship, you have to convince yourself that, again, this is a display of love, that this is how they feel about you, that this is like to make it okay to stay because you're afraid to leave and all of these things. So it's like subconsciously, yeah, you hate it and you know it's wrong and all of that stuff. But like that's not always what it feels like in the situation. You think they're doing it because they love you because that's what they say. Like
yeah. And I just don't know why the author or the researcher feels the need to just separate Lana Del Rey from like every other survivor experience. It's just like the way she said it is just so black and white. And the line she's talking about is when she said, no, I need to get it right. I keep getting it wrong. He hit me and it felt like a kiss. That line is what she's talking about. And it's also like, you know, anyone that ever related to that line, she's like, just the way she says, like, most people experiencing violence hate it.
Right.
What?
And it's like, she's a research assistant. I don't know if she has experience with this. If she does, then I would give her more of a pass. Yeah. And be like, okay, that makes sense. Because again, like you going through it, it can warp your brain and like have you have tunnel vision on like experiences. Yeah. But like if she is just a research assistant and doesn't have direct life experience, then I'm kind of like, you're sitting on your high horse of academic research, psychological analysis, and you're minimizing the real lived experiences of people who have been through this and are creating art about that time in their life. And that's not okay.
And that line just kind of threw us off a little bit.
Right.
But continuing to read, what they want more than anything is respect from their partner, but they receive violence instead. There's a great emotional pain to that as well, as it shows that their partner would rather hurt them than understand them. While analyzing Del Rey's career with expertise on domestic violence proves problematic elements can be found, the question of creative freedom still remains. With a history of unhealthy relationships sprawled throughout her discography, Del Rey seems to be speaking about domestic violence from her own personal experience. Criticizing her work, therefore, appears to be invalidating. Experiences are complicated. You can't put the lives of others in the same box. I don't think we can ever avoid controversy when it comes to making art about abuse, Lindsay said. Her feeling the responsibility to hide her experiences as a shameful secret is very counterproductive if she has experienced violence.
Yeah, I don't like this line either.
What
because
the fuck?
How are you fucking telling a survivor what is, like, bro, like, she's probably working through her shit and she's making fucking art about it. And like, do you have to be completely healed and therapized and whatever the fuck to like create art? Like, oh, you need to be a role model for everyone. Like, fuck off. Like,
fuck
stop.
Fuck that. Like, I gotta read that back. She said, her feeling the responsibility to hide her experiences as a shameful secret is very counterproductive if she has experienced violence. That's crazy.
And it's like, no, she's sharing her experiences. And you're saying, no, she's not sharing.
Like, she's not trying to be productive. She's fucking making a song, learning her shit.
Experience. And you're trying to rewrite her experience and be like, no, you actually weren't submissive. How the fuck do you know?
Don't call it a shameful secret.
Fawning is literally a trauma response.
Yeah.
That a lot of survivors go through. I've done it myself. It's fight, flight, fawn. Like, fawn is a thing where you act submissive and you like apologize and you like kind of like get your abuser on your side. Like, that is goodbye. I don't like her.
And it's also can be a tactic too. Like, it's very, okay. Her being open and honest and exploring it in a critical way is interesting and good for her. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
The controversy is a double-edged sword, said Lindsay. Quote, domestic abuse evokes controversy because it makes people feel something that isn't at all desirable. People also have such low levels of accurate information when it actually comes to abuse and how it manifests, she said. I feel that we're better off hearing honest experiences than shielding impressionable audiences from something that might hurt them. It's true that they might embody this as a glamorous thing or something to strive for as they try to be her, but that discredits the intelligence that women have.
So at the end, she's trying to be like, okay,
yeah, what
but
side is she on, bro?
I know. So I'm like, I don't know. We don't have the interviewers' questions in this, or like maybe they like pulled apart her shit and chopped it up or like whatever. Because at the end, she's kind of onto something like, Okay, yeah, that's what you should have been saying the whole time.
Because she did, like, not everything she said was bad, but the bad things she said were just really bad. Like,
Really
I couldn't even keep reading. Like,
That's
what?
why I wanted to include it, because that is a lot of the criticism that she does face. And like, this is a research assistant. Like, that she has like the accolades that someone would think is like, oh, she really knows. But it's like, bitch, you don't
and
really
it's like
know.
all of this, like, things like you said, are trauma responses. Like, the body doesn't know. Like it just does what it knows. Like, no one knows why. That's just what happens. And so it's like all abuse is so different because every person is different and how they react to it. It's like, so that's why it's like when she's saying like we can't put it all in one box. Yes, but then you just bashed Lana and was like, you know, that's counterproductive. That's not the right way to do it.
And she needs to be a better survivor. And like, what? Like, bye.
That's disgusting. Okay.
Yeah, but now I'm just gonna read like a couple posts in a Reddit thread talking about this whole romanticizing, glamorizing abuse that Lana Del Rey supposedly does in her music. We don't have to talk about it too much because it's kind of what we said.
Yeah.
But someone said, I'm so tired of this criticism. I grew up in an abusive household and always felt her discussions of abuse were quite accurate and realistic. The way she acknowledges how abuse / neglect she suffered at the hands of her parents as a child led her to those toxic relationships shows me that she understands that abuse is a cycle. If your parents hit you or rage at you and tell you they are doing it out of love, you will eventually start to believe that violence is love. She really gets it. Someone else said, she's the only famous person I can think of who talks honestly about abuse. And frankly, other people, not her, glamorize abuse by talking about how, quote, strong and, quote, brave they are for surviving. Lana tells the truth, and the truth is that it fucking sucks. Half the time, you're being abused, you think it's your fault, and that if you were better, prettier, richer, more successful, it wouldn't be happening. She names that reality and doesn't sugarcoat it. And I just want to say one line from her little Instagram post that I like to and forgot to mention is when she talks about, like, I'm not glamorizing it. I'm just a glamorous person talking about my experiences. And I think this is a constant thread, and we'll touch on it again when we get to the teen section. But it's like, Lana Del Rey is a beautiful woman.
I know.
And does that make her sadness not valid because she is beautiful? Like, you know, like, are we mistaking glamorizing it for her also being beautiful and creating beautiful art?
Yeah.
And like that, because I think when you are being abused, like, I know for me, it's like, oh, exactly. Like, I need to be prettier. I need to be better. Like, I need to like whatever. And so I'm sure like some of that plays into it too. But it's like, no, like someone can be hot as fuck and still experience abuse. Like,
and it's the same thing with Euphoria. I really do think so. Because not only was Alexia Demi, I think is her name.
Alexa Demi, yeah.
Yeah, see how it's close, it goes. So it's like, I didn't want to say Maddie. It's like, bitch, like, what's her real name? But yeah, not only is like her abuse glamorized, it's like she is. Like people, I was her for Halloween one year. Like she's a bad bitch. But yeah, you think of Lana Del Rey and like she's all like, like it's very like ethereal, as the girlies would say. And it's just
ethereal,
like, thank you. And so it's like, are we getting those things mixed up? Like, I think so a little bit.
And even with Maddie, because it's like Maddie is the hot, popular girl with the perfect boyfriend. And it's like so often in those situations, you want to be like, oh, well, she has everything. So like, she chose him. Like, it's her fault, blah, 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 blah. But it's like, look at what she's dealing with behind the scenes. Like, just because a person's glamorous doesn't mean that it's, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's like, do we need to see someone ugly to suffer to like really?
Right.
Because it's like, as a society, it's like we like love to hate pretty people. And like, that's because of patriarchy. It's like, you think they have like all the privilege in the world.
We think pretty people have no
problems.
problems.
But it's like a mask. Like they really don't.
Like we had a listener submit in our therapy episode that their therapist told them like, oh, how can you be sad? You're pretty.
Insane.
It's like,
that is like awful.
Yeah,
awful.
But we put that on women so much.
That's what I'm saying. It's because of patriarchy, for sure.
Yeah. So next I want to get into the whole idea of how much context do we need when we're talking about these issues of like, you know, survivor narratives, abuse, glamorizing it, toxic relationships, all of that. So first I want to start us with this article from the HuffPost called "Fans of It Ends With Us Will Love the New Film, but there is something missing." And this author talks about her experience going to the movie and the car ride home and talking to her friend about it.
She says, as my friend pulls into our neighborhood, I think about those women in the theater. I think about how most, if not all, of them read the book. Most of them, like me, had background information from the novel to fill in the blanks, to contextualize the montages, to give meaning to a woman leaving an abusive marriage and the hard conversations and firm boundaries that decision necessitated. But the movie doesn't do this. It bypasses the hard realities of Lily's bravery, and the women who are going to fill theaters across the country this weekend deserve more. A common criticism of the novel is that it glamorizes abuse. While I think the claim hinges on interpretation, I do believe the movie is more at risk for this critique to ring true because of the uneven, rushed pacing at the end. Because the film spends less time on how Lily leaves and more on how she falls in love, the depiction is unbalanced. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And I do think like the pacing of the movie was rushed. Like I think she's right in that. And I think she's right that a lot of people read the book and like have that context and stuff like that. But again, I'm kind of like, how much context do people need to like, I think people need to do their own research before, like, I don't know. So I'm a little iffy.
Yeah.
And then another person from Cosmopolitan said, I think when I was reading the book, I could differentiate how the relationship was extremely toxic and how it narrated what a lot of women go through trying to get out of a toxic environment, explains 24-year-old brand coordinator Ayushi Shah, who used to be a Colleen Hoover fan. The problem is that her audience is super young and may not have the understanding as to why this is toxic and not how a relationship should be. The problem with her storylines is that domestic abuse often comes off as a fixable issue when it is very much not. And now I want to get into some stats because again, on the topic of context, how much fucking like I don't know, this pisses me off because I'm like, trigger warnings, yes. Like I think we need trigger warnings. It should have had that. But like context sometimes, I'm like, guys, like America has a fucking problem with abuse, sexual assault, domestic violence. And if you are not aware of that, you are living under a rock and you are choosing to be ignorant. So now I'm going to read through some stats.
Facts.
This is from the hotline, the Domestic Violence and Abuse Hotline. An average of 24 people per minute are victims of rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner in the U.S. More than 12 million women and men over the course of a single year. Nearly 3 in 10 women, 29%, and 1 in 10 men, 10% in the U.S. have experienced rape, physical violence, and or stalking by a partner and reported it having a related impact on their functioning. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men aged 18 or older in the U.S. have been victims of severe physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. 1 in 4 women, guys.
Yeah, that's the one I always hear.
If
1
you remember,
in 4.
like, let's remember at least, it's easy to remember. 1 in 4, like 25%, like, hello.
Yeah, it's very easy.
Intimate partner violence alone affects more than 12 million people every year. Over 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced rape, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime. Women ages 18 to 24 and 25 to 34 generally experience the highest rates of intimate partner violence. Nearly 1 in 5 women and 1 in 71 men have been raped in their lifetime. Nearly 1 in 10 women in the U.S. have been raped by an intimate partner in their lifetime. 2/3 of female stalking victims have been stalked by a former or current partner. 30 to 60% of intimate partner violence perpetrators also abuse children in the household. 9.4% of high school students report being hit, slapped, or physically hurt intentionally by their partner in the previous 12 months. Approximately 1 in 5 and 1 in 7 of men who experience rape, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner first experience some form of partner violence between 11 and 17 years of age. 1 in 10 high school students have experienced physical violence from a dating partner in the last year. 43% of dating college women report experiencing violent and abusive dating behaviors, including physical, sexual, digital, verbal, or other controlling abuse. 52% of college women report knowing a friend who's experienced violent, abusive dating behaviors, including physical, sexual, digital, verbal, or other controlling abuse. Survivors are 3 times as likely to meet the criteria for PTSD. Survivors are 3 times more likely to have suicidal thoughts and 4 times more likely to attempt suicide. And survivors are 6 times more likely to have a substance use disorder. So it's like, I don't know, like trigger warnings and stuff like that. Yes, there needs to be context. But everything else, like, oh, like at the end, like she shouldn't have done this and this. Like, I'm just like,
yeah.
Are we living in reality? Like, this is our culture.
Yeah.
Like, okay, when we talk about like life imitates art, art imitates life, like whatever, like we have so many forms of this media being present because this is what's going on in our country. Like, this is the reality for a lot of women who are dating and men as well, and teenagers.
Yeah.
Like the numbers for teenagers are crazy. So when we talk about impressionable audiences and all of that, like I think media plays a part in it, definitely. But it's also the laws, the culture, the education, everything else. Like this has been a problem going on, like in our sex education episode where we talk about like the violence and the sexism, the racism, all of that stuff that America was founded on. It's like this has permeated our culture forever.
Yeah.
So we can't look at the movies and TV shows sometimes to be like, why are they showing things like this? Well, because we have a fucking problem in our country. Like this is the experiences of many women and men, and it's also many men and women not realizing that these relationships are toxic and abusive. Does that make sense?
Yes, bitch. I just want to give you a moment. Like, that was so good and permeated. Great use of the word. Like,
Thank you.
goddamn. But I'm like, taking us back to that article that we low-key hated when she was like, I feel like when you put out any art of abuse, it's bound to have controversy. And it's like, now I'm like thinking like, why is that though? And it's like, I think one of the biggest reasons it's like why people freak out about movies like this too is because they don't want to accept that reality that you just listed off.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's no line between film and reality, especially when it's based on a true story. And it's like, we also went to Emerson. We know a lot about the film industry and like how it's always going to be dramatized to an extent because it's a film. You can't get away from that.
Yeah.
But I think people just don't want to accept the reality. It's the same thing about, well, we don't want to educate our kids about these things. We don't want them to see the movies because we don't want it to happen to them. We just want to keep them far away from it, which we all know is not the answer because 1 in 4, like, you know what I mean? It's like, it's a harsh reality. But it's like we need to all be setting our children up like for success in these regards because the teenager thing, and that's why it's like, well, why are these kids in high school? It's like, well, they are in high school in real life that this is happening. So that is important, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. And I think it's more the case for people who were friends of, you know, survivors or were survivors or stuff like that to create these projects. But what's frustrating is like, we want to criticize those too, but why haven't we been criticizing the culture that's been glorifying and glamorizing them before this? It's almost like now that there's so much pressure because we're realizing that these narratives were fucked up, that when we have a trauma survivor like creating a piece of art about this, it is the sole piece of media that needs to speak for everybody else. And it's like, yes, like that would be great, but like people still need to be able to create art. And what about holding the government accountable? What about holding like law enforcement, police officers accountable? What about education? Like all therapy, like all of those things are still like, I don't know. So it's like some of that stuff, I'm like, it's on people to do your own research and realize that like narratives about and art about abuse doesn't all look the same. And a lot of us are ignorant because of the culture that we're living in. We've normalized a lot of shit that we're not used to hearing like stories that are actually similar to reality.
Yeah. And it's pessimistic, but it's like, how are we going to expect a culture that allows this shit to go on in real life and doesn't understand the nuances and doesn't believe survivors to like appreciate a film and be able to look at it complexly. It's like most people don't have the tools to do so unless, God forbid, they've been through it or know someone that has. And it's like, look at the stats. It's like you should know someone who has because of how large they are.
And you probably do.
But people are silent. They don't feel comfortable or that, you know? It's
and that's even the thing when it's like people get mad at the end of like It Ends With Us, which like, guys, like I hate that this is like the example just because it's so popular right now that it brought up this conversation.
It's the thing about the child.
Yeah, it's the fact that like he holds a child and he stays as a co-parent and people are so mad about that. And like, do you need survivors to get on here to explain like why that's a real thing and that's a real thing that happens and how it has to do with trauma and how it has to do with more manipulation and abuse? Like, I don't know.
And the laws. Like, what if there's a custody hearing? They don't believe you in court. You don't have a choice whether to let your child see that man.
Exactly.
They could get taken away from you because they don't believe you or you're a person of color. Like, there's so many. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, I don't know. Like, I think it's good to have discussions about it. I think it's okay to ask questions. But before people just like get up in arms and get like angry about things, like, let's think a little critically about who's writing this narrative. What was their intention? What are the ways that this could be, you know, someone's experience and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So,
and I do think it's like, I think they completely fucked up with the movie and not having hotlines and triggers. But I do think it's like, if you have PTSD or history, it's like you need to research what you're going to look into before you let it trigger you, you know? And it's not your fault that content is going to trigger you.
And choose not to. It's like I thought about that before I watched it because I was like, okay, like I know it could be a trigger for me, like showing whatever. And there were certain scenes where it is a little bit like triggering, but it's also like I knew I had the intention of like, okay, like I can turn it off if I'm uncomfortable. Like, and also like I feel like I'm a little desensitized to it because I've been through certain stuff. So like things that trigger me are sometimes different. Like it's more like a smell, or it's more like this song that he really liked, or this like place, and like stuff like that makes puts me back into that place versus like I don't know.
Like a scene depicted of abuse,
Yeah,
but it depends. You don't know. Like, you're taking that risk, but you're, like, choosing to do it, you know? Because it can be healing as well.
Yeah, but I do wish that, especially because Blake Lively, like, doesn't say that she's, like, a survivor, and at least Justin Baldoni, like, did his thing.
Yeah.
But, like, she could, like, she was a producer. Like, they could have done more to advocate for it. You know, it is what it is, but whatever. Okay, next.
Oh, sorry, one more thing. Imagine what it would have been like if they did market it in a better way. Would have people have, you know, because even me, I haven't seen the movie, but I have a TikTok account, so I know all of the marketing and the Blake Lively shit and just how it's like she's completely missing the mark, and it gives you a bad taste about the movie before you've even seen it. So it's like, imagine would that have changed things, you know?
Yeah, and I think it would have, because I almost didn't want to see it if it weren't for this,
right. I literally have been like, I can't even look at her face anymore. Like, I went on a deep dive of like old interviews of her just being like rude to women, and it was just people really dug up shit after this.
She's a very like self-centered person. And that's why that YouTube video that I recommended, guys, is like about celebrity obsession culture and like needing to be an influencer when you're like an actor. Like, okay, so next, a little bit about patriarchy. I did mention it, but just to show more about like context and how deeply this permeates society. Even if you are not a survivor of abuse, I think a lot of women can relate to the negative experiences that they've had with men, bad experiences that can border on traumatic, you know what I'm saying? So This article says, on a personal level, as women, many of us are in the process of emerging from our core patriarchal mandates that tell women to be small and to be quiet, to accept our role as the dominated inferior sex. One of the central ways this shows up in our everyday lives is so commonplace and familiar that we take it for granted. And yet within it lies an untapped power to upend patriarchy. It's how we show up in relationships. As women, we are conditioned to believe that our value lies in making relationships work, that the emotional realm in our domain, and if relationships fail, is always our fault. Even when we know it is best to let go of a relationship, there may remain a subtle residue of self-blame that continues to plague us under the surface, long after the relationship dissolves. Cultural messages about gender reward us for being the, quote, emotional sex, and valorize those among us who attempt to rehabilitate immature men and tolerate unending disrespect from friends, family, and colleagues. We can see this as the subtext of countless sitcoms and romantic narratives. Patriarchy tells women to be peacekeepers in their relationships. Quote, you have to be okay with everything and make everything okay. While confirming this peacekeeper role in relationships has given many women a sense of power and a way to feel safe in an unsafe world, you may have been praised for being steady, consistent, stable, and a reliable force in your relationship. Yet those functions are often code for some measure of a doormat, a dumping ground, and presenting no threat to the status quo. So it's like exactly like the patriarchy creates this environment in which women are like responsible for their relationships. Like if things go badly, you probably didn't do enough. Like, you know, you need to make it work. You need to make things better. And so then it's like that doesn't disappear when it comes to abusive relationships either. Like if anything, it's like magnetized.
It's two playing at once. Yeah.
Yeah, and we always want to blame like the victim. Like, you know what I'm saying? So it's like some of this stuff when we're talking about romanticizing it, it's like, no, we're just like telling it how it is when it's like women have been conditioned this way.
Right. And
this is how they behave.
And we hold women to a higher standard that they should be able to conquer the violent Joker man that is trying to. Like literally though, it's
and then we're not happy when she doesn't leave and she doesn't divorce him or let him see the kid and all of that. When it's like, do you know how difficult that is? Like, do you know how difficult it is to leave a relationship like that, let alone with a kid? I don't with a kid. Like that's insane, on top of all the stuff. So it's like, let's check ourselves. Okay, so the last section of this whole how much context do we need kind of section is just a little background on how toxic and abusive relationships work, in case you guys don't know, because I think it informs a lot of the content that we consume involving this stuff. So the first thing is a trauma bond. What is a trauma bond? You guys should listen to our Therapy Speak episode where we go over some more commonly used terms in therapy speak. But an actual trauma bond is an unhealthy form of attachment, usually with an abuser and a victim. And it includes lying about the abuse to your friends and family, feeling like the abuse is your fault, constantly trying to explain your partner's defects in a positive light, feeling like you have no choice in the relationship, believing that you can change the abuser's behavior over time. And then there's so much more, but that kind of explains the behavior that so often we're like, oh, why is she doing this? Why is she staying? Blah, 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 blah. It's like, why is she making excuses? Because it's a trauma bond. It is a medical condition. Her brain is sick. A little bit more, we have this other article, just trauma effects on the brain. Recounting certain moments often leads one to muddle in the haze of nostalgia, hurt transforming into empathy, fear transforming into comedy. The human mind has the great ability to transform even the most obscene circumstances or environments into neutral territory. Normalization is a coping mechanism, a means for survival, a sort of necessary evil. But what happens when we are pressed to an extreme and through means of repetition? We accept that extreme as normal or just okay. The age-old saying, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, comes to mind. What if the beholder has seen so much that the eye had simply tired out from recognizing reality? Romanticizing abuse in any form is a coping mechanism that strikes when the mind bends perception between reality and fantasy. It's the dopamine high spawned from continually chasing different results through the acceptance of repetition. So it's like exactly like for you to be able to survive in this circumstance, you have to like warp your brain to romanticize it and normalize it, which is why those tropes of normalization and romanticization appear so often in art, because it's like showing the experience.
And if you're not a survivor, it's like what comes to my mind is like just, you know, when people don't want to admit that they're not okay even, you know, it's just like saying like, oh, I'm fine. You're going through the motions. You seem like you're good. It's like a response because you don't want to spiral and you're scared of what would happen if you did. And it's like,
you don't want to
how am I? And then back to the abuse. It's like, how am I supposed to be in this house every night with this person if I don't convince myself? And our brain like wants us to be safe. Like,
yes,
I've been doing like my own I don't know if this is fucked up. Like, honestly, we might have to cut this out. But I've been doing my own research on dissociative identity disorder when people have either continued abuse, whether it's physical, sexual, mental, as children, and basically they kind of like have different consciousness. They don't have one personality formed. They have like different fragments of the mind as like different people, and like it's basically comes from the brain wants to protect the child, and it's safer for the child to disassociate during the abuse because they won't remember it. So it's like the way that our brain works to like help us out maybe isn't always the most productive way, like what that bitch said. But it's what our body literally does without us knowing to help us feel safe. Like for all of it's like, oh, why didn't she leave? It's like because her brain like wasn't there. Like you can't, you know, make yourself do something.
Mode.
Yeah. So yeah.
Like we wouldn't tell someone with diabetes to be like, oh, like, you know, just what is it? Your blood pressure? What is
insulin, I think.
Blood sugar.
Oh, yeah.
You wouldn't tell someone with diabetes to just like, you know, their blood sugar is fine, like whatever, when it's not, and they need a snack and they need to like whatever. So it's like you can't just tell someone who has PTSD or trauma or something like that, like, oh, just leave, like whatever. It is their brain. Like it is what is like chemically going on as well. So,
and if your brain's like telling you that this is not a problem and that you're safe and it's going to be okay and this person loves you, like you can't go against your brain if that's what it's been, you know, every single day. That's what it's been, you've been believing to yourself.
Right.
It's hard to just rip that Band-Aid off.
Yeah.
And that's why it takes a lot of time. So we asked you guys the question, have you ever romanticized a toxic relationship that you've been in? 69% said yes. 31% said no. God knows I have.
Oh, yeah.
It's basically all my full-time job when I'm dating someone is like any toxic thing that they do, I romanticize it as to being like, we're so fiery in love. Our love's different than yours. You wouldn't get it.
Yep. It's not boring. Like it's better. And you do it to a degree to make yourself feel better.
Yeah.
You know, because
I've been the cause of like, I've done manipulation to people. Like I'm sure. Like I've done it too. Like I know that I'm not just like a victim in the toxic relationship space. Like me personally, like I've been on both ends of it. Like, it's not fun either way. And that's why I went to therapy.
Yeah,
and
romanticize that too. And same, like, outside of, like, I've done bad things in the abusive relationships that I was in where I was being abused, but I think it's a little bit different because of how it was.
Yeah.
But in the healthy relationships that I have been, like, when I was younger, before those relationships, I had done things that I would say were really toxic and really, like, manipulative and, like, hurt people's feelings
and, like,
stuff
lying.
Like that.
Like, I've done lying in my relationships. I think, like, I would like lie to like protect myself, but it's like very much teetering on the like selfishness line.
Yeah.
You know, where it's like, okay, well, you're still continuously lying to someone, you know? Like, we can't.
Yeah,
let's find another way to protect ourselves.
Same with me. I feel like my stuff was more like depression related and like anger lashing out and like I'm so hurt that you should feel this too. And it's like, okay, mental health is a thing, but you also can't put that on your partner.
On people. I know.
You know, so it's like,
I know. And I'm honestly like, I did that to my first girlfriend, like when she first broke up with me. Like I put on her how I was like, I'm done. Like you fucking killed me, bro.
Yeah.
But then it's like having it done too back. It's like, I'm never doing that again.
Never,
because
yeah.
it is horrible to be on the receiving end of that. Like awful. So yeah, it's fucked up. But we we be doing it.
yes, we are not perfect.
Yeah.
But next we're gonna get into dark romance. So I really like this section because I learned a lot.
You're a lit major.
Yes, and I'm a literature major, so like love this stuff, geek out on this shit. I never really studied romance that much when I was in school, besides just like reading Romeo and Juliet and like the basics. Like I've never really been like a super lover of romance. I read like Sarah Dessen when I was like in like middle school, high school, like that type of stuff. But dark romance is a little bit different, and it's super popular on Book Talk right now. So we're going to read this article first.
So this article is written by Megan Easley. It's called Opinion. Romanticizing abuse does not make a novel romantic. She says, according to Words Rated, the sale of romance novels has grown from 3 consecutive years since the pandemic. In 2023 alone, 39 million copies of romance books were sold in print. Dark romance is a fast-growing trend in this boom of romance books. Book Riot describes dark romance as a rising trend among readers, often erotic romance that contains themes of sexual taboos such as kidnapping, sexual assault, and lack of consent. The genre often blurs the lines between violence and love. The label of dark romance implies that the book will contain more mature and intense themes. However, it often sensationalizes unhealthy sexual relationships in order to keep readers hooked on the shock factor.
Yeah, and I think erotic. Yeah, and I think erotic is important in this too. Like a lot of these romance books like could be considered smut too, dark romance. Like there is like a sexual element to them. Like some people read them and masturbate, women's porn kind of thing. But then we have this this article too, which goes a little bit more into the popularity of dark romance.
And one of the articles that we read from before, bringing it back, it says dark romance is more of an umbrella term than a subgenre of romance. It encapsulates everything from historical bodice rippers to mafia and motorcycle club romance novels. It's been in use since at least the early 90s. The historical romance author Mary Jo Putney credits critic Kathy Robin from the Romantic Times with inventing the moniker, saying, light romance evokes laughter and sweetness, while dark romance works with more intense emotions. A dark romance can involve rape by one of the main characters, physical abuse, childhood trauma, serial killers, or countless other types of bad behavior. A book is tagged as dark romance more as a content warning than a mission statement. But the underlying idea is that this is a romance novel where you cannot expect clear-cut morality.
Yeah, this genre has received a lot of hate as well as a lot of love. And so we're going to try to dissect it a little bit more. I know I was kind of drawn to this because I have a lot of sexual fantasies that involve abuse and stuff like that. And we do have a CNC kink episode where we go into more
that y'all
about
love.
that y'all love. Like that one's consistently climbing. Like it's got a little movement to it. Where we talk more about kink, and we're not going to talk about kink like too much in this. But I was really interested in this topic because that is something that I fantasize about. Like I do fantasize about being dominated and controlled and abused by a man. Is that a trauma response? Whatever. And just high level, like we said in the episode, like this is a fantasy. It's not reality. And it's also like you're doing it consensually with a partner who loves and respects you. That's who you should do it with. And also in the comfort of your home when you're masturbating and like whatever. Does that
that's the best kind, bitch.
Does that mean it doesn't make you feel weird and bad about it and stuff like that all the times? No, it definitely does.
Yeah.
But we kind of think it's okay. I mean, it's huge in the BDSM community.
And it's like duality and like representation of like you even saying like as a survivor, like that is something that you would like sexually fantasize about. And it's like, is that a trauma response? Is it not? It's like, will you ever truly ever know? Like,
I feel like it is because I didn't have that stuff as much until after.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think it probably is.
Yeah.
But some people it's not. So I don't know.
Some people it's not. Yeah, exactly. But no, I mean, I definitely feel that. And I read a book called Winter Girls, which honestly, guys, I shouldn't even say the name. Don't read this book. It completely glamorizes eating disorders. And let me tell you, I wanted to be the book. And so that's what I can relate this to. And even me watching SVU religiously, every one of those episodes is about DV, sexual assault, sex workers. Like, why?
Yeah.
Why do we eat that up so hard? I don't know. And obviously SVU is way different than a romance novel. There's no romance. It's like a crime show.
Yeah.
But I can't help but like that addiction piece that I have of like just wanting to see more of that. And it's like, I find myself thinking, how the fuck do they come up with these endless stories? And I'm like, because this is real life. Like, this is what happens. But I can just really see like, and I know we're going to get into the teens soon, but like teens eating up this sort of thing, because if you're 16, like I wasn't thinking critically about like, you know what I mean? Like I was like, he's hot, I'm down, it's fucked up, whatever, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like, it is a little bit scary to me that this is even like a genre, but I do understand that I never sit here and be like, oh, I don't want to read that, because I don't really read, but like the movie, like, yeah, I would watch it, like for sure.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be like, I haven't purchased any of these books, but it's just like, I get why it's like appealing. I get why it could be healing for people that have been through things, but it does scare me a little bit that the industry's booming, as the article said.
Yeah, and we're going to get into why this is. And I found this amazing video essay, but I want to talk a little bit about dark romance storylines as a power fantasy and therefore a coping mechanism. And I think it's like really interesting that you brought SVU into it, because true crime, I think we see a lot of this as well, and I'll explain that after. So,
because didn't you see earlier that like women love watching true crime or something?
Yes, exactly, exactly. And we're like, why do women love that? And like, you know, they romanticize
like watching the
killers.
thing you're so afraid of happening to you. Like I'll look over on my roommate and like it's dark thoughts, but like we, you know, encourage dark thoughts in this house sometimes. I'm like, what would you do? Like if you woke up like that, like what would you actually do? And it's just like, why do we, I don't know.
This is why we do.
Okay, this is why we do it.
So this YouTube video is by Bazazilio. I don't know if I'm saying that right. This is the first video of hers that I watched. It's called The Unknown Pleasures of Problematic Romance. And this video blew my mind. I don't agree with everything, but there's certain stuff that she says that I think is really interesting. So she starts it off with saying, you know, do we dream of male domination? Why is the bad boy romance so popular? Is it female masochism? Is it internalized misogyny? Like, what the fuck is going on here? And then she goes in to talk about the concept of fantasy, right? So like any type of fantasy, we're suspending our disbelief. Like, oh, these people can fly, these monsters can talk, like blah, blah, blah. We don't question why it's possible. We know that it isn't real, but why is it different with romance? Because romance is a fantasy. It's not real. Why do we think women can't tell fantasy apart from reality? And I want to return to that question after this, because I think that's really interesting. Okay. But she says that fantasy as a genre, which romance is, manifests unspoken desires and anxieties, pleasurable outcomes of a problem. So the fantasy that you can achieve the dream despite its outcomes. So it's a coping mechanism. So when you think about like men and how they have these fantasies of like going to war and winning and these action things where they like survive it all and then they're the hero. That's their fantasy of being like masculine in culture and being appreciated for all that they do and all of that. For women, women's popular culture aims to somehow solve and process negative experiences in a fictional setting. These are solutions that may not be applicable in the real world. So popular culture recognizes the problems that women deal with and gives them a happy ending. So many women, when we talk about like patriarchy, when we talk about abuse, sexual assault, all of those things, romance is particularly dark romance, is reimagining these situations as a fantasy in which everything goes correctly. So it's not representing the romantic ideal, she argues, but the fantasy of being able to deal with this abusive person and bring them to a point of surrender. So she says that in real life, we have no power as the woman over this abuser, but in fantasy, we do. So in adventure stories, heroes defeat the villain despite everything being against them. And in romance, the heroine saves the villain, and it's a power fantasy of pacifying your abuser, of taming the beast. So you're like bringing him to this point of surrender where you're using your empathy, which is often seen as the quality that women need to have, so that he surrenders, realizes he's being bad, and then you guys live happily ever after. And she says when she's reading these books, she's excited to see the man crawling at her feet and begging for her forgiveness. We want to see him at that point of surrender at the end because that means that she defeated the villain, the abuser. And the abuser isn't meant to represent the ideal of a man that we want. He's meant to be the villain that we want the heroine to defeat. So it's all about the heroine. Like, we want her to overcome this like society, this romance where everything is against her. And so it's dreaming of defeat by empathy and not violence. And then she goes into a little bit more talking about like how women enjoy violence and submission as a sexual fantasy, and how so often women are told like not to have sexual fantasies and all of this stuff. But because we live in a patriarchal culture that promotes men dominating and controlling women, women have internalized that in this fantasy kind of way to like imagine a world where they can enjoy it. And so that oftentimes comes up in like erotic stuff where like we talk about it's a consensual partner and like whatever. So she says that saying this contributes to toxic relationships is the same as victim blaming. And then the last thing she ends with is like the audience isn't incapable of realizing that this is not reality. Like she's saying, give more credit to women to believing that like fantasy and reality are different things. And I want to say, like, I completely, like, part of it clicked for me because I was like, okay, you're right. Like, every time it's women's media, and I think it's the same with true crime, right? Why do we love to watch it? I think part of it is like, oh shit, like, this is being talked about because there was like justice for this terrible thing that happened, when so often women don't get justice for murder, rape, abuse, all of those things. But you're watching this on SVU where there is justice. Like, there is a woman who like is held accountable, all of that. And we also, like you said, want to watch our like biggest fears happen because then maybe we're somehow aware that they could happen. And like, we want to prepare ourselves. So it's like this idea that like, it's not that we like it, but it's a catharsis, it's a coping mechanism, it's a fantasy in the same way that like men have their shit. We just don't like men's stuff uses violence so much and we're like, it's okay. Like, hero defeats villain with sword and gun and this is okay. But then when it's romance, woman defeats villain with empathy, we're like, that is preposterous. That is insane. And you know, it's like, but that is a fantasy. And I think it is iffy because like, I don't know if I can discern fantasy from reality until I watched this video and I looked at it from a critical lens.
Yeah.
Because I think so often we're looking at stuff, like we don't know what reality and art is. We're not given art education. We're not given like the humanities, like anthropology, sociology, all of that stuff that would prepare us to critique this stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
So it's like we don't really want the bad boy. We just want him so we can like make him change and be better. kind of thing with the bad boy, not with abuse. But then it's like, I don't know, like the whole part about like, it's not enough just to see the story of like someone being abused. It is about like them like getting victory, like focused on the heroine, like you said, right?
Yeah, because so much of predominant culture that surrounds women too is right. The happy ending is they end up together. Like the happy ending is the man, is romance, whatever. That the happy ending is that he realizes it's wrong. So like the fantasy is that like she, main character woman, is so great in her femininity and her empathy and everything that even with this monster of a man, she can defeat him and create him to not be abusive and they can live happily ever after. So it's like subscribing to these like patriarchal fucked up beliefs, but rewriting it in a way that we can only imagine because it's not true and it doesn't happen.
Right. I guess when you say like I had a hard time between reality and fantasy before watching this video, what did you mean by that?
Okay, so yeah, she gives all of these examples and she didn't put Colleen Hoover's It Ends With Us. She specifically mentioned that, but not in this genre. She doesn't think it's part of that. But like Twilight is one she gave an example of. She's like, the purpose, like her watching it, she was like, I was not idolizing Edward. I knew his behavior was weird and bad, him stalking and all of that. I wasn't seeing him as this like great character. Like I understood what's going on. I don't feel that way. Like I feel like when I consumed a lot of that media, that's not what I was internalizing. Yeah. But I think she's also not from America. I don't know where she's from, but it's like maybe the culture and the education is different there. And like, I don't know. I didn't have that education specifically about romance and all of that stuff. Yeah. So it's like, it is difficult. But when you look at it from that lens, and I feel like the reason I love it is because I'm like, yeah, anything women love, we love to critique. And men are so often come at us like, oh, like you don't want the nice guys. You want the bad boys. Oh, you want blah, blah, blah. Not realizing how culture has conditioned us to be with those guys. Like, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, yes, we have agency. Yes, we can choose who we want to be with, like to a degree, and we have to unlearn things. But like the culture that we're growing up in, that is what's taught to us as what we should want. And we are taught that we should solve all relationship issues with empathy. So it's like the fantasy that that's possible. It's not possible. It's the same as like, you know, superheroes and supervillains. The superhero can't go on a rampage and destroy the fucking city to kill the evil villain. Like, that's not real. Like, that cannot happen.
And you can't make your abuser stop abusing you.
Right, exactly. You can't defeat him with empathy. So it's the same thing.
Yeah. Jesus Christ, dude. So looking at the comments under this video, someone said, you changed my perspective. I have a distaste for problematic love interests, but instead of censoring any media that is perceived to be problematic, we should instead advocate for media literacy and engaging in media critically. Going into either extreme ends of mindlessly consuming content or being problematic police are not helpful. Someone else said, thank you for this video. Female romance analysis rarely gets this much understanding and empathy compared to any other media analysis. People are very quick to jump to, wow, women are so dumb for liking that. It's hard to find an actual non-judgmental and honest look at such a prevalent field of literature. Someone said, honestly, the whole dark romances will lead to an uptick in women getting into abusive relationships. It's just a gender-flipped version of the video games make boys into mass shooters discourse. Okay, T. And this last person said, problematic romance is liberating because it provides an escapist playground for women to explore desires without having to put themselves in danger doing the same things they read about. People who do put themselves in these situations are too busy with that to always be greatly inspired by works of fiction, although that can happen too. But the bottom line is women are constantly condescended to as if they can't tell the difference between fantasy and reality. When I went through my Twilight phase in my teens, I was constantly annoyed by this. Yeah, I don't actually want someone to break into my house and watch me sleep, but I love it because it's a fantasy, you clods. I think she's insulting them. But even I fell for this and had my own Twilight is Cancer successive phase because I wanted to distance myself from the kinds of criticism that hurt me so badly. These days, I prefer my fantasy a lot better written than Twilight, but I make no apologies for wanting it in the first place. Okay, so it's kind of like a safe space for you to like explore your fantasies without like feeling judged, because it's like, how could you ever really want that done to you when she says escapist playground?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, because I feel like I do have a sense of like reality versus like fantasy, because like I've been lucky enough to like practice kink things with people that like love me and like respect me and like were able to like educate me on those things. But like if there's one thing about me is like I feel so much shame for like liking the things that I do, and like I've always felt shame about that. Like I've liked weird shit since I was like 12 years old, like just being like curious and stuff, and like I always was like, well, what's wrong with me? And I do think that like the whole Twilight thing, it's like they're just going to use anything to make women like feel bad about themselves for liking, it's like he's a fucking vampire. Like I get it. It's dark romance. He's crazy, but like he's a vampire. Vampires are not real to my knowledge. So this is like a different thing. I just love Twilight. I'm like, please don't demonize Twilight anymore. But I don't know. I think that it's like there should be a space for dark romances for sure. But I think, like we've been saying, in a culture that doesn't give us education about abusive relationships, that's where like it gets dangerous. Like, of course, there should be a space for it. And I think like women need a space to like explore that. And it feels weird. Like I've never been kidnapped before. And it's like, why do I have sexual fantasies about being kidnapped? Like that feels weird. That feels like I'm being mean to other survivors that I could even want that. But it's like this comment section is like validating that like we all as women like have these like, places we want to be able to fantasize in like a safe way. So like you said, like we could get ahead of it potentially, or like know what to do in that situation, even though that's not true. But like it makes our mind maybe feel like, well, we know how this works. Like maybe we could help ourselves or something. But I don't know. And I just think our culture doesn't like know the difference between sexual fantasies and reality, like when it comes to media, like as a whole either. So I feel like it's like an impossible battle that you try to win with that kind of.
Yeah, because it's like these spaces are supposed to be like, same with kink and BDSM and stuff, like safe spaces to like rewrite these traumatic experiences or explore this like dark thing that you like feel shame about, like wanting to rewrite the badness of it in a pleasurable way, because it's so much of like society is conditioning like, oh, you're a woman, you might get kidnapped, you might get da-da-da-da. So it's like you hear all that and like, okay, it comes out in eroticism where you want this fantasy that you can experience that and you like it, especially when there's so much victim blaming and stuff going on.
But it's like you never want to say that you like it ever, because then if something, God forbid, does happen to you, it's like, oh, well, you liked that too, right? And it's like,
well, and that's victim blaming. And that's why it's like there should be a space for this type of stuff with like the media literacy and everything that like you're talking about. And it's like exactly like we don't prioritize not just sex education like our last episode and relationship education, but also like the arts and like literature analysis, film analysis, anthropology, sociology, psychology, all of these things that explore like the darker, shameful aspects about like how society impacts our brains and how our brains are wired to want pleasure and like all of that stuff. Like we put so much of an emphasis on truth versus or fact versus fiction, like truth, like science, and like this is real and this is not real, that we like don't leave space for like art and fantasy and like exploration and like all of that. So so this next section is from the previous article, and it says, in the 2020s, the online defense of dark romance largely resolves around the revelation of the personal. On the hashtag dark romance side of TikTok, users share recommendations and salacious screenshots, but you don't have to scroll for long before coming across an indignant response to finger-wagging moralists, with dark romance TikTokers saying, I'm a survivor, I've been abused, the safety net of romance novel is how I process my trauma. In an XO Jane world, it's so common to publicly unpack trauma, to rip yourself open for internet critics who never cared about you or your well-being in the first place, that it's become the first line of defense for readers of dark romance. Dark romance can be healing. See, I'm healing. After a few years of seeing this, I've had enough. I don't think this type of personal disclosure is necessary to express interest in romance novel. And It Ends With Us, which is not a romance novel and contains a character who leaves her abuser, is not didactic enough to escape the accusation of romanticizing abuse. Where does that leave everyone else? And I just want to say didactic means intended to teach, particularly in having moral instruction. So she's arguing that like it shouldn't have to be like teaching you something, like it can just exist as a fantasy.
Right.
This is not by any means a new conversation. The idea that the primary goal of romance novel is to be instructional, to set an example for young girls, is rooted in the patronizing and sexist belief that women, particularly young women, are incapable of distinguishing between fiction and reality. Second wave feminists were critical of romance novels just because they focused on love, implying that if a romance novel heroine desires romantic love above all else, surely the young reader will do the same. We've moved beyond that critique, but we seem to be stuck on the idea that a romance novel isn't just a category of genre fiction, but that it needs to have a moral justification to exist. That we can't extract themes or feelings or ideas, but we need to be taught how to behave by a romance novel. And so then just to summarize like a little bit more of the article, she essentially challenges the idea that women stay in abusive relationships because they romanticizing abuse, suggesting the reasons are often systemic, as we talked about, not because they're like reading this romance book. Yeah. And then she says that like critics argue that It Ends With Us doesn't properly address domestic violence, but like as she pointed out, this reflects a wider issue of expecting fiction to deliver these moral lessons, particularly when written for or consumed by women. And then she essentially ends with saying, like, it ends with us and Hoover's dominance deserves scrutiny. Like, why is this so popular? But blaming or patronizing the young female readers is unfair, and that's ignoring the bigger problem of why this is popular. Mm-hmm. Instead, they should be given more credit for their ability to discern fiction from reality. And that's really difficult, right? Because I don't think I've always been able to discern fiction from reality, but like a lot of people can, like especially people who love this type of like literature and media.
Yeah, and it's like, it almost is like, you know, give women more credit, they can do it. And you're like, well, actually I can't do it. And then it sounds like it makes you feel kind of like weird. But I don't know, the part about like it's saying she's saying just kind of like let the romance novel be on its own. Like, why does it always have to have some like moral meaning or like teach society something? Yeah. Is like kind of tea, because I don't know, like I 100% agree with that. And I think that I wish it could be like that, but it's more just like, I do think that it can be harmful to like have a movie like about abuse. And like it said, there's no trigger warnings. There's nothing. It's like, I think we should expect a little bit of like morals, not a happy ending or not something that's like, so like, this is the perfect way she tamed her abuser, all of that. But it's like, I don't think we're at a point in the world where we can have like a piece of art just be so raw like that. It's like people can't handle it to an extent, which sucks.
But it is reality too. Like it's both and, right? Because it's like back to the conversation we had earlier about like how much context is needed. It's like the same with this. And like another video essay I watched about this stuff is like a lot of the romance novels are marketed to a YA, like young adult audience, with these flowery covers where they're not given trigger warnings and they don't have like excerpt. This is fantasy. This is not reality. Or they're like presented as like not what they are. And for a young, impressionable reader who is like picking this up for the first time and just wants like a cute little book to read at the beach, like that's not what they're getting. And so it's like, but then you got to think about, is that on the writer? Yeah, probably, definitely. But it's also on the publishing industry and the marketing industry that is like creating this type of stuff, because I know, like, I have a dad who's a writer. Like, he only has so much control over even what the cover of the book is, or even like what they put. Like, you have to like give things away. Like, he had a book that was an adult book that they were like, no, this should be YA, and it doesn't have anything like abuse or anything like that in it. But that happens a lot because YA is such a big audience of readers. So it's like, there's multiple systemic like powers at play, but like to demonize the women who enjoy this genre,
is just completely missing the mark. Yeah. It's like when we discovered, like, okay, we can't blame TikTok when we had a society that technologically advanced and created this thing, you know? Like, we gotta like think more back. And it's like annoying to like put everything on like the system and like all of that. But it's true. Like, we grow up a certain way. We're very affected by all the media that we watch, especially when it comes to these love stories. And it's like, we can't help it if we're going to feel a little bit weird about things and then maybe grow up and have particular fantasies. It's like, that's where it's out of our control at some point, and all the internalized messages that we're getting as teenagers, preteens, whatever. But we asked you guys, do you think women romanticize toxic relationships like IRL? And 84% said yes and 16% said no. And then we asked you, do you think men romanticize toxic relationships? 79% said yes and 21% said no. I think it's maybe different, but I think ultimately, like, all genders do.
I think so too. And I almost want to argue that men do more, because I think there is
in a different way. It's not
because I think there is more of a common line among women who share experiences of like patriarchy, sexual assault, abuse, all of that, for us to be like, we know this is wrong. Like, you know what I'm saying? Versus men, I feel like they think this is right and they have no concept of like the other.
Yeah.
But I think because of this whole like escapism place for women's kink and women's like romantic fantasy and all of that to play out because of our conditioning, it's like often seen as like women romanticize it more.
Yeah, I know. And it's because everything men do, it's like, again, no one even thinks twice about it either. But it's like what your friend is enjoying this dark romance novel book, and it's like a huge thing, you know?
Yeah.
Like, men just fly under the radar and like aren't questioned as much.
Right. Like, the girl who's reading the dark romance book, is she romanticizing abuse? Or is my abuser who said, oh, like, isn't this what they do in the movies? I did this because I love you. Who's romanticizing abuse? He is.
He's literally playing a character, like saying that line that's been in a movie, bro.
She's like at home masturbating to this rape fantasy and enjoying it in the confines of her home and knowing it's fantasy versus fiction. Like, let's be
wrong,
serious.
but
like, it feels wrong. Like, I know, but
I
it
hope
feels
I can
wrong
get
sometimes.
to a point, and like we can all get to a point where like we can like appreciate that. But I do think, like, appreciate that about ourselves. Like, it's okay, whatever your fantasy is. But I do think learning and like breaking all of this down like is ultimately helping me, because like part of me is like, you know, we weren't really set up to think otherwise. Like,
no.
Like, and I love Twilight, but yeah, bro, that shit fucked me hard. Like, she was in between these two, a wolf and a blood-sucking demon. They both stalked her. Like, it was just, and it's like, no, like, he was the perfect boyfriend. He cared about her. He would come and watch her sleep and make sure no one tried to kill her. So I just feel like part of it is like out of our control. And it's like all that we can do is like try to unlearn things and like accept ourselves for these fantasies, you know?
And it advocate for like the next generation, as corny as it sounds, to have better education around this stuff, because it's not going to stop. Like, the ones that are written by people that are trauma informed and know this is fantasy versus fiction, but there's also going to be plenty of men who are romanticizing these toxic relationships, and women as well, in a way that's actually like super bad. And then like if we don't have the knowledge to even be like, oh, hey, that relationship was toxic. Like, you know?
Because I remember my mom being like, well, it's just a movie, remember? Like, it's not. I'm like, yeah, I know. And it's like annoying. Yeah. So it's not an easy task to like educate kids on these things.
They don't want to hear
it. They don't want to hear it. But it's like, now I'm grateful. I'm like, yeah, Mom, you were right. It's not, you know?
Yeah, it's not reality.
It's not, but it does feel like it is. Like, and that's what makes a good movie, right? It's like feels very real, but it's hard. And I keep going back to like what you said, like life imitates art imitates life. Like, which one is it? Like, I don't fucking know. But I do think ultimately it's art imitating life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So next we're going to get into our last section, which is the idea that all of this romanticization and normalization of toxic relationships in the media is hurting the teens. A lot of it is valid, but it's more nuanced than just that. So this first article is called Romanticizing Abuse in Media, and it says the romanticization of abuse in media has been normalized within Gen Z culture, especially with the rise in the use of social media accessibility. The problem with toxic relationships displayed through the media is that unhealthy relationships are passed on as healthy ones. In television shows, movies, and books, the media often mask the toxicity of certain relationships between characters with the idea of passionate and intense romance. They cast conventionally attractive characters with hot, sexy, and exciting relationship dynamics, creating a sense of desire for the same thing in our lives. This is prevalent on social media apps such as Instagram, where stan accounts will create edited videos of TV show couples with captions fawning over their relationship. More often than not, the relationship in question is usually screaming with red flags left and right. And then we also have this article called What's Wrong?
Real quick, even the way they say, the romanticization of abuse in media has been normalized within Gen Z culture. Because it's like, they're like, Gen Z is normalizing it. Like, it's not Gen Z to an extent.
It existed way.
You know what I mean? Like,
the normalization of violence is like, you know, Quentin Tarantino and like all that shit was all like, shoot 'em up, gun, everyone's happy, like we're killing everyone. Like all of that stuff started like way back.
I think it just seems that way because of TikTok. Like, I can't lie.
I think it's also that like people have grown up online and are exposed to counter ways of looking at this.
Yeah.
That they're like, oh, this is actually a problem and we need to acknowledge this, maybe with education. Because think about it also, like in the 1960s, the popular media was like the newspaper. I think there were movies, but like, and books and stuff like that. And you read popular books in your classes, in your English class, and discussed them. And like, other than that, what other media was there really going on? There was one radio station, one fucking news channel. Like, there was not that much. But now we are bombarded by so much information and media and all that stuff. Not that relationship dynamics were great back then. They were probably worse because women had no rights.
Right.
But yeah. Okay, so this next article is called, quote, What's Wrong with Me? The Roles of Time, Media, and Cultural Influence on Adolescent Relationships. And I'm not going to read anything from this article, but I just wanted to say that the takeaway from it is that a lot of young teens feel pressure to meet certain milestones in relationships, like have your first kiss, have your first relationship, having sex, like all of that stuff, despite the fact that like not everyone is doing it. Like we have a false perception of like who really is. And a lot of that also is due to media because we have so many like college movies about crazy partying and drinking and like all of that stuff. We have to live out
our years that we didn't do in high school.
Yeah, and like even high school movies too. And I think that's why a lot of other cultures, like when I was in the UK and stuff, and people from over there were like, oh my God, like American parties, like I would love to go to an American party. And it's like, well, some of it is like that. Like it's not always like we're just crazy in high school, you know, but that's what the media makes it look like.
Yeah, it's pretty mid, honestly. Like you got some like, people bobbing their heads.
The house party exists for an hour and then the cops come. Like it's like, not that great.
Bro. Yeah.
But they're saying that because of this, like a lot of kids internalize that as like the standard that they need to like live up to. Like, and again, like we have actors that are 26 playing a 15-year-old. It's like they're trying to like look like this and be this developed and have this romantic relationship that is not age appropriate, you know?
I know.
So like things are romanticized not just in the form of like, oh, this toxic relationship is really toxic, but it's being presented as like a ideal relationship, but also everything else on the level of like where teens should be.
Right. Right. And then this next article we want to talk about is called How the Media Glamorizes Toxic Relationships. It's from Her Campus, which fun fact, bitch. So Her Campus, these fucking people, like I thought it was good, right? I was in high school and it's not bad per se, but I just have to say this because me and my best friend at the time, like we were trying to be, you know, little social justice warriors, whatever. Let's go to Her Campus, see what they got to say. But like literally, bro, like they like, and this was a long time ago. This was in like 2014, 2015. So maybe they've evolved. But they like, people were getting on stage and like, this is what to wear to keep yourself safe on campus. And they're like covered up. This is what not to wear to keep yourself safe.
What?
Yeah. And like me and my friends.
This a school?
It's it's a company. They have like an ambassadorship program. It's a little bit unclear. But I remember going to my friend like, bro, we got to get the fuck out of here. Like, this shit's crazy. But I think they have evolved since then. But, like, I never recognize any source. And I do recognize this.
Okay, well, then let's take that with let's
take it with a grain of salt. Exactly. But not to say that was a long time ago. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt. They say the idea of healthy love and relationships is also rarely taught to teens. This approach of figure it out as you go when it comes to first relationships and adolescence increases the chances for teens to find themselves in toxic relationships. Sometimes they may not even realize the situation is toxic because they have never been taught or exposed to anything different. Adding the glamorization of unhealthy love and intimacy from the media only increases the chances of toxic relationships among teenagers. This also has the potential to create a cycle of toxic ideas about love and enables abusive relationships throughout their entire life. Most of us find we replicate early childhood relationship dynamics in our adulthood. Usually the kinds of relationships we have witnessed or experienced growing up are typically what we are drawn to as adults, says Dr. Sarah Davy, psychologist and author of Never Again, Moving On from Narcissistic Abuse and Other Toxic Relationships. There is a strong need for proper education and difference between healthy and unhealthy relationships for teens. Domestic violence in high school and college relationships often goes unnoticed or brushed off because of the normalization and glamorization of toxic traits in romantic relationships exposed to young people. I mean, I liked that. I thought that was good.
I think this article is pretty good. Like, I think, what was it? Oh, the whole figure it out as you go thing. We talked about that in our sex education episode where it's like, exactly, like that's what most teens have to do. And
like,
I think
what else do you do? Yeah.
Right. And I think it's concerning that sometimes we're afraid to talk to teens about domestic violence and sexual assault and all of this stuff when like the stats show that the teens have experienced this. Like, you know, so
like
it's like,
there needs to be this in high schools. And I remember there was like a woman that came and performed a one-woman show at my high school called The Woman in the Yellow Dress or something. It's like a very famous story of this woman that went through abuse and she tragically ended up, you know, dying. But that was like the one good thing my school did. It's like, it's so prevalent and it sucks, but it's like literally at like 12, 13 years old, like my best friend growing up had an abusive relationship in 6th grade, bitch.
Right.
We were fresh out of fucking elementary nap time. Like, it's not funny, but you know what I mean? Like, we were so young. How the fuck would she have known anything? Like, her parents have been together their whole life, typical happy. Like, it can happen to anyone at any time, and it's so important. And I do like how the article was like, the media adds to this, not the media is the enemy.
Right.
Like it adds to what's already there, which I think
if sometimes like I think the media does us a benefit by at least touching on these things. Like I don't think like especially like in The Devil Wears Prada and like The Notebook, like certain like stuff, maybe The Notebook is romance, so it's different, but like certain stuff, I'm kind of like, that was just unnecessary. Like it was just unnecessary for the love interest to treat her like shit and this to be like presented as a happy romance all the way, you know, like that was bad. But other times it's like, okay, like with It Ends With Us, like I think it is posing an interesting question and like displaying whatever, like for the culture. So
yeah, and how many times has like a mainstream movie been about this kind of thing, you know?
Right.
Not to say that it doesn't matter even if it's poorly done, but like as we've argued, it's like we do think that was representative, you know?
Yeah.
Okay, this next article, Teens Romanticize Toxic Relationships, was published in 2023 by Sophie Ponce de Leon. And she is a News 3 editor and co-columnist manager. Okay, Sophie. Okay, she said, do you remember when a boy or girl would pick on you in elementary school? Oftentimes your mom or dad would say the same thing every time. Kids only do that if they have a crush on you. Yeah. From a very young age, we are told that this behavior is normal and means that someone is attracted to you. It is a simple yet harmful way to think of life. Jesus fucking Christ, dude. I mean, like, I knew that, but just hearing that, it's like...
In this context.
Wow. Yeah. It's terrifying. Like, yeah, he threw that pencil at you. He just likes you. Okay.
Yep.
Teens in society today struggle with seeing the partner's potential in the relationship and romanticizing the toxicity instead of seeing its true colors. If I'm going to be completely honest, even I struggle with this. Many factors can cause us to think this way. Some factors can be little things that happen in childhood. Growing up, we hear boys will be boys. That means they like you. It was a joke. Lighten up. They didn't mean it like that. We apply these phrases to our teenage years and relationships. For example, you could be in a relationship where your partner makes you feel trapped, but you keep thinking it's normal since you were taught to romanticize the behavior by ignoring it. Many heroes and heroines are teenagers or young adults that deal with topics teenagers are attracted to. It's just promoting what we already know from our childhood. Damn. I didn't like that one.
Like, yeah,
no,
I'm just
I do,
like,
but it's...
boom, though. Like, exactly. Because it's like so often we want to like... And I'm not saying we need to not blame the media and not take a look at who's producing the movie, who's acting in it, Blake Lively, who's directing it, who's written it, all of those things, because there needs to be more done by like the right people, I would argue. But like, it's a manifestation of the fucking culture. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've been told that when I was like growing up, like, oh, he just likes you. Like, oh, boys are being mean to you because of this. Like, these are all social codes that we're like internalizing as we grow up. And then you just see it represented everywhere.
And keeping the secret if something actually does happen, because you know you're just going to hear these bullshit remarks. You know what I mean? And it's like, even I grew up in a house with 2 social workers working in this shit, and like something happened to me briefly in elementary school where this man, he was a boy, he came up to me in the cafeteria and just like humped me while we were standing up. Like, it was really weird.
Like a dog?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever told you that. Like, it was really weird. Like, I was just standing there. He comes up, just like humps me. And I remember just looking at him like, you know what you did. And like, whatever. Like, I was like, I'm smart. Like, my mom... But I didn't tell her for like 3 years, bro. And it's just like, that's just like what I want to prove with that. It's like, it doesn't even matter. It's like, we are so like, just, I don't know what the word is, but like pressured to be silent about those things because of all the boys will be boys. Oh, he just likes you, all that shit. It's like, then people are quiet when it like really matters. And it's really scary.
Yeah. And I think the normalization exactly by parents, by teachers, because teachers have done it 1,000 times too. Principals, fucking coaches, like all of that is so big. And like what I would also push for is like where the fuck are the narratives of like actual healthy romance and healthy relationships and that stuff? Like that, I think dark romance can exist and us talking about toxic relationships and Euphoria and all of that can exist. But like, can we have a fucking rom-com or like sitcom with like, and I'm sure there are some, but I'm just like, and maybe I would find it boring. I don't know.
No, that's what I'm saying, which is so crazy. And that's a whole other episode. But it's like, it reminds me of like music artists when they're like done healing. People are like, damn, the music hit better when you were hurt. Like when you were traumatized, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like a joke for the most part, but it's like, yeah, because our culture eats that shit up, whether you relate to it, you don't, you've been through it, you haven't. It's like, and maybe it's because like that's the only time we get it. We don't have the education, so at least we have that. It's like bizarre. I don't know.
Yeah, and that it makes me think like, you know, with all the like rappers and stuff that are accused of like promoting violence, and a lot of them are like promoting violence or whatever, like wouldn't it be insane though if they just turned around and made a song like don't use guns, like fuck it, like, you know, like no one's gonna
people
buy
would
that.
make fun of them, which is
right,
crazy.
like no one's gonna fucking do that. But like,
and my mom used to tell me like lyrics matter, like you're singing these words with your whole chest, like even if you don't believe in it, you know it's misogyny, like you're still singing the song. Like, what are you doing? I'm like, I don't know. I like the beat. Like,
it's popular, Mom. But at least it's like, I think that is like a good thing to like promote. Like, it's like you're going to look at your mom and be like, this is so corny. Why are you telling me this? Like, whatever. But it's like, it's good to like constantly repeat that and hear that because like we need it. Like, I'll probably do that with my kids if I have them. Like,
I know.
You know?
They're going to think we're annoying as fuck. But like now I'm grateful.
Yeah.
Because even though I fucked up and didn't listen, now I'm like, okay. Like
You had a point.
she tried. Yeah.
Yeah. And so lastly, we just have this last poll. Why do people romanticize toxic relationships? Guys, there's so many reasons, and I wanted to put so many more in here, but we only had space for 4. There was a different one that I removed because someone replied and was like, you should put upbringing and past experiences. And I was like, you know what? You're right.
You're right.
Why isn't that on
You
there?
clocked me. Yeah.
Right. Which one at 50%? People romanticize it because, you know, if they grew up with someone, their parents that had it, their brother, their sister, if they experienced it, they're more likely to romanticize it. 28% said the ups and downs make it exciting. 15% said movies, TV shows, and books, and 7% said it's hard to find a healthy partner. And I think, you know, as we talked about, it's also fantasy. It's also trauma response. It's also like there's so many reasons to romanticize it. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, which doesn't help because it's just like there's so many forces against you while you're trying to like unlearn.
To tell a narrative, like you can
things,
romanticize it like we talked about to advocate for it and show the survivor's perspective. So there's so many reasons that you can. But I think it is, and the last thing I want to say before I bring us to the final questions and like wrap it up is like, it is important to unlearn all this stuff. Like, I feel like that should be a given based off everything we said in this episode. Like, there's a difference between consuming media for like pleasure, as porn, as like a fantasy, as an escape, as an educational tool, all of that. And also like going through like experiences and romanticizing toxic relationships in your real life. And like both of us said, like that's something we have direct experience with and are still constantly unlearning, like still in therapy for all of that stuff. Like, and that's partly why I wanted to do this episode, because I wanted to understand at least the media side of it, if I can't always understand it completely in my whole brain, you know? So like, if you are someone that catches yourself romanticizing relationships and not being able to discern between reality and fantasy, that is okay. But at least like clock that, acknowledge that. Congrats to you for watching this video, and maybe like continue to pull that apart a little bit with your therapist, with friends, with family, and media.
Because I promise you won't forget that you did that and analyze that, and it will be like more present in your mind, like moving forward. You know, it's not going to fix everything. Like we have to put things into practice and all of that. But I do think like just reflecting on your own upbringing, like the movies that you watched and what are the things that could have conditioned you to romanticize these kinds of relationships. You know, it's different for everyone. But yes, very important to unlearn it. Although it's very hard. Yeah.
Oh, very difficult. All right. So we have made it to the end of this super long episode, as they always fucking are. And we're going to end the episode as we always do, talking about what we're so wet, so dry, and still confused about the topic, because it is okay to be confused. And we want you guys to comment, let us know what you think, and add to the conversation, because we are always learning. But some discussion questions that I want us to think about in our wets, dries, and confused are: when is the romanticization of toxic relationships okay? And is it ever okay? Who is this kind of media for? How much context do viewers need when consuming a piece of art? Is it on the responsibility of the creator or the consumer? How can we prevent the culture and young teens from idolizing toxic and abusive relationships?
Okay, yeah, I'll go first. Well, I don't want to be corny or make you uncomfortable, but I do want to say, like, I'm so wet and so proud of you for, like, choosing this topic and, like, making the outline, like, from, like, not even a year ago, like, not even wanting to call yourself a survivor, accepting that, and now, like, look at you now, like, so proud of you. This was definitely, like, hard for both of us, and, like, we did it. We got through it. It was very serious. Like, you know, we love to laugh and giggle with you guys, but at the end of the day, like, this is, like, a foundation of, like, why we even wanted to ever be on the internet with microphones. Like, to talk about, like, serious things that, like, impact both of us and everything. But I don't know. For the first question, when is the romanticization? For the first question, is romanticizing toxic relationships ever okay? I mean, I feel like I definitely learned a lot about the dark romance genre. And I do think in that sense, like, if survivors need to, like, kind of read a dark romance novel that does somewhat romanticize toxic behaviors and that helps them heal or, like, separate fantasy from reality, like, I do think there should be space for that. I don't think, like, I feel like the only conversation we're having is about how it's glamorized and, like, how it's, you know, in the media everywhere. Like, we're not talking about the stats like you listed, or, like, the actual problem with teens, which everyone's so desperately trying to protect. But, like, unfortunately, they're the target age for a lot of these things. And so it's like, there should be media for them that represents that maybe they don't want to talk about, like, you know. But I do think just the overall glamorization of abuse in the media, like, that is a huge problem. Like, I'm not wet about that. I think that, like, one of the articles said, it's really hard to make art about abuse and you risk it being glamorized to an extent. Like, there's another movie about eating disorders, To the Bone, where, like, I mean, that shit was glamorized as fuck. And, like, I really think so. And, like, yes, she struggled and had a really hard time and it was sad, but, like, I just think it's really hard to do well. But I also think, since I've had an eating disorder, it's like my own biases come out and it's like, oh, well, I didn't relate to that experience or whatever. So it's glamorized. Yes. You know, so I think there's that going on. But I think, like, overall, like, having the majority of, like, teen programming, like Euphoria and Pretty Little Liars when we were growing up, and, like, having it glamorize these types of things is bad. Like, I wish we had more. And we do to an extent now. Like, we have, like, Never Have I Ever and, like, things like that. Even Ginny and Georgia, the show I tell you to watch, though, like,
I know
it kind of glamorizes abuse in an extent too. But I think it's just also wishy-washy. And, like, I am confused about, like, how we're ever going to get to a point where someone can just put their art out there and have it be about abuse and, like, it's going to be received correctly. Like, I think it's a really hard thing to do. But again, I am, like, wet about the dark romance novels, like, while people are, like, using that as their escapist playground, like the YouTube comment said, and, like, having a space to, like, not feel shame about these sexual fantasies that you might be having. I think, is it on the responsibility on the creator or the consumer? I mean, I feel like I'm overall wet about the Lana Del Rey conversation because there's so many nuances to that. Like, her centering herself and being like, I have it worse than Doja Cat and, like, who Beyonce and things like that. but also like her being right, that she has gotten a lot of she has gotten a lot of people telling her that before, and she is a survivor herself. And like, I do think that a lot of her lyrics are valid and she deserves to have that art. And like, I don't know. I don't really think it's on the creator. It's like, when did we confuse artists with like responsible role models? You know, it's like, and that's like the Disney Channel pipeline. It's like they made stars and made them responsible, like fresh and pure. But it's like, why do we expect artists to be like that? They're not social workers.
Maybe
they're not
that's
doctors.
why. That's an interesting thing to look into.
Yeah.
How Disney Channel
Bro,
made us
I will
think.
do that episode,
Yeah,
bro.
that would be a good
me,
episode
bitch.
for you to do.
Because it's like, and I get it. It's like, okay, well, they have a younger fan base. That's who's the art is reaching. Like, that's who they should want to be a role model. And I do agree to an extent, but I'm just like, I don't know. So I'm wet about the nuances about that. And then lastly, how much context do viewers need when consuming a piece of art? I mean, I think this is huge, and kind of like what you were saying and like adding in the statistics in this episode. It's like, I do think it's on people to educate themselves. If you're going to watch a movie about eating disorders, about DID, about abuse, sexual assault, it's like, maybe educate yourself a little that this is a real problem, and maybe don't like jump to Twitter like talking shit, because all survivor stories are different. This was one depiction, you know, obviously if it's like done with malintent, that's a different thing. But like,
yeah,
baby reindeer and like It Ends With Us, it's like at the end of the day, like if there is even one survivor that got something through that when there's nothing, like I do think it's worth it, you know? And maybe that wasn't for you, that piece of art, and like that's okay too. But yeah, I'm overall just really wet that we chose this topic. I mean, it's like, it's such a big problem, and it's like not even with TikTok or the movies, but just the way that our minds work and the way that we see bad boys, we see predators, and like maybe we have a sexual fantasy pop up, or maybe we just like feel bad for him because we're women and we always feel bad for everyone. But it's like, it is scary, like how your mind works and what we've been conditioned to view this shit as. It's not just the media. It's not just TikTok. It's like full on the system, like the things you ingrain growing up.
Yeah, 100% everything you said. I think I'm wet also about me being able to talk about some of this stuff because it has been hard. Like we've touched on it in other episodes, but like when it's a whole episode dealing with like this movie and everything like that, like I was hesitant, but I think it was important to do. And I'm also wet about the journey that I've been on and not glamorizing, romanticizing, and normalizing toxic relationships. I think I'm a lot further than I've ever been because of therapy.
Sure, bitch.
You know, like to me, the idea of a healthy relationship sounds like really nice. Like the boringness sounds great to me. Like
Right
I'm
now,
tired, you know? And I would be wet about like more media that does show healthy relationships, even though like we say like it could be boring, but like, I don't know, like I think we at least need to give that a chance. Yeah. Not everything has to be like violent and evil and like whatever for us to like enjoy it.
Jesus Christ.
Like we need to have something else. And same, I'm wet about, at the end of the day, I think I am wet about the movie It Ends With Us if it does impact how some people view survivors, because I think there's such a problem with that. And I think, yeah, I've internalized a lot of it, like being a survivor, because you don't always want to tell people. People will blame you. I already blame myself enough. I can't fucking deal with it. So that's a lot. Same with Lana Del Rey, like wet about, I think, what she has done for the culture, even though a lot of problematic things as well that shouldn't be excused. But I think like there should be a space for her to create art, because I'm also like, the whole idea that you need to be like the role model, like you're saying, and like be perfectly healed to create any form of art. Like I feel like, you know, survivors already look at themselves as like broken people or fucked up people or like whatever. And so it's like, oh, can I not also create art coming from this point of experience? Like, can I not be on my healing journey and also like create something that's, you know, like maybe not perfect? And I think that should be possible, like baby reindeer, like all of that stuff. I'm wet about the awareness that I think we tried to bring to the topic in this episode. And I hope that people take that away. I'm wet about Justin Baldoni bringing awareness to it, even though the marketing for the movie was fucking terrible. I hope that if anything from it, good comes from it, it is that.
Yeah.
And overall, I think I'm also wet about at least people criticizing the marketing and realizing that there is a problem. Because I think maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when we were growing up and stuff like that, like people wouldn't have thought anything different. They would just be like, oh yeah, new rom-com. This is what it is. Like, oh my God, yeah, it's so crazy. Oh, why did she stay with him? Like, and we wouldn't be asking these deeper questions.
Yeah.
So at least like, people are questioning things. People are like tired and fucking fatigued of just seeing this as like the only dominant narrative of romance. And I am also wet about the idea, the dark romance thing and the whole idea of it as escapism, as a coping mechanism. I think when I watched that YouTube video, it was just like something clicked for me. And I don't know why, even though it's like we're talking about this in terms of literature and not like reality. But I think I really self-reflected when she said like, oh, I watched Twilight and I didn't romanticize Edward. I knew what he was doing was wrong. And I thought like, I didn't do that. Like, should I feel shame about that? No, because like where I grew up, like what everything else impacting that. But watching that and being like, okay, duh, I've thought about it in terms of kink and I've thought about it in terms of sexual fantasies. But like on the romance aspect of things, I don't think I have been able to discern like when I've been in an abusive relationship, like this is a fantasy. Like this is a fantasy that he will ever act right and we will be happily ever after, like all of that. Like that is the fantasy he's trying to sell to me, but that is a fantasy that's not reality. And so like I think the more that we talk about these romance books and these types of things as fantasy and not reality, that like something in me clicked. So I'm wet about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It sounds so simple, but I'm like
no, it does not. It does not, because I have to tell you the whole Edward thing, like, because like we've all seen those TikToks of like them just like demonizing him in the corner. Like, I don't know. And I was like, wait, what? I was like, that was wrong that he did that? Like, genuinely same. Like, I was like, oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I knew that. Totally.
So I completely get that. And I think like, yeah, and I'm wet to have more conversations about this on the future, because this is kind of like our first stepping stone of dipping our toe into it. Yeah. But for dry, I mean, I guess for the question, who is this media for? Like, I do kind of wish It All Ends With Us was geared more towards survivors, although I think it's important to change the general public's mind that are victim blaming. I do, but I wish there was more media that was just for survivors, and like, maybe other people wouldn't understand, but who fucking cares? Like, maybe it wouldn't do as well, like, whatever. I don't know. But I feel like, I don't know. I feel like any movie, TV show tries to make themselves as marketable to as many groups as they possibly can. But I definitely know that it's like when they were making Pretty Little Liars, they knew that young girls would look at these women like I like wanted an A to be like with my friend group. Like we were Pretty Little Liars one year, like, because I had this, it was a whole thing.
And the thing with
like,
that
what
too,
the fuck?
With Ezra and whatever, what's her name?
Aria, bitch.
Aria, yeah. One of the things that I kept reading, and there's more articles about this if you guys want to deep dive, specifically Pretty Little Liars, Euphoria, all of that. But like, is that the narrative was like they're star-crossed lovers, so this makes sense. And that's bad. Like that's like
really bad.
Grooming. Like,
oh my God, I know. Like literally, like, and we're like, he's so hot. Meanwhile, I'm literally in high school, like, and this is
looking
fantasy.
at and I remember girls being like, oh, like Aria, like looking at male teachers, like, you know, because you want to imitate what you think media is doing, like adults, like all of that, because where the fuck else are you learning about it?
Yeah. Obviously dry about like all the stats that, you know, we said, even though it's the reality, and I think it's really important. It is heartbreaking, but it's like, you have to get past that and educate yourself, and don't like for a lot of parents to just like hide away from that and like not believe their teen daughters and teen sons and teen people need to know these things and be prepared. It is scary, but it's like, I think it's important. And then how can we prevent the culture and young teens from idealizing toxic? Like, bitch, I don't know. Like, I guess I'm the most dry about that because it feels damn near impossible. I feel like we're in so deep right now. Like, I don't know, because it's like you think of the media, the TV shows, but then it's just like social media influencers like telling stories about their real life, and it's like romanticizing this shit. Like, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't think the answer is to like keep teens off the internet. Like, I think it's to like have more conversations with them about these things, be specific, and like take them to art shows like about, you know, like the woman in the yellow dress that changed my life. Like when I saw that, like it really did. Like, I think art is an incredible teaching tool. Not every piece of media needs to be like morally correct and like be able to teach you something. But I do think it is like a good, you know, tool to teach kids about, you know, if you have a good piece of media. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of dry. It's like very heavy, and like the sexual fantasies being confusing from real life to sexual fantasies, like dry about that. Like, that's really scary. And just, yeah, it's a whole lot of dry, honestly.
Yeah, same. Definitely dry about the statistics, how prevalent this stuff is. And I think like more than that, like how prevalent it is and how often it's ignored, and how we're just like so often not doing anything about it. Like you said, like not talking about it, like not acknowledging the reality of the culture that we do live in. Like we so often like victim blame and like all of this stuff. And so I'm just like dry as fuck about all of that. I think on the topic of context, like I'm dry and like also a little bit confused, because it pisses me off like when we hold this one narrative from one person who experienced DV as like, you know, like this needs end all be all, like there needs to be more. And how people don't do their own research, and then survivors are like feel obligated to dump their not dump their trauma, it's not even like that, but like use their trauma as an example to advocate for this stuff, when like one of the writers said, like it shouldn't be their responsibility to do that. Like they've already been through so much. I mean, to some degree, I feel like it is, at least for me, like my responsibility, especially in this podcast. But at the same time, it's like confusing, because I do think trigger warnings are important. I think like resources for hotlines, I think like all of that, or even like a little blurb, like, you know, at the end of movies where they're like, so-and-so went on to marry so-and-so. Like, you could have a screen with the stats, or like a screen with like, it does not take that much.
I know.
You know, so like doing that is not difficult, but I think when it comes to context, a lot of it is up to people. But at the same time, I'm dry that there is no education about this stuff. Like even how you're saying, I'm like, sex education, relationship education, like internet analysis, like it sounds insane. Like, when
but it's a new thing. Like no one's like, and like no one's had time to like catch the fuck up. But it's like, we do need it.
And imagine like a school where it's like you have an internet analysis class where it's like you have a teacher who's a professional in the stuff, maybe like sociology, whatever, and they dissect like trends that are going on and give a space for you to have open discussions that are informed by an educator about this stuff, because it's almost like dissecting the news or something like that, or at least incorporate it into like other classes, because this is a whole world that teens are dealing with, but don't have really a space because they don't feel comfortable with their parents. School isn't like you're learning about math and stuff. Where are they going to talk about it besides their friends who are under the same impression that they are? So it's like there's no space for them to digest this stuff. So I'm dry about that. Lastly, of course, like the marketing for It Ends With Us. And Colleen Hoover, like I haven't read her books. Yeah, the merch, the marketing, all of that. I hate how she did that. I haven't read her other books, but I heard the writing's terrible. Can't speak to how her other books romanticize stuff, and obviously dry about like the normalization of so many toxic relationships passed off as good in regular media.
I am that we broke down normalization, romanticization, and glamorization. I think that's really important, honestly.
Yes.
But for confused, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is like the whole argument of like, like something about like give women the credit that they know fiction versus fantasy. Like, I don't really know. Like, that was the most confusing thing about this. And like, honestly, that YouTube video too. Like, I feel like I'm like, what the fuck? Like, it's like a lot. Like, it's one thing to, you know, have you say that to me when we're not recording, but when we're recording, like sometimes I do think it's like hard for me to grasp like really big concepts. Because I'm like, I don't know. But so yeah, I think like, yes, like we should give more people credit, but I do think like when you're like younger, like it is hard to like really understand like what's fiction and what's real.
Fact,
like, yes, like women in general, like, yes, we should give them more credit. But it's like if we're talking about teens, I'm like, it is really hard to know because like you're not thinking critically about what you're consuming. But I still don't think they shouldn't have access to those things. I'm just saying like that was something that confused me a little bit. And just because, you know, we mostly spoke about the romanticization of abuse and toxic relationships in media, like it helps us to an extent, but it's still like so different from real life. So it's like what to do in that aspect is still confusing. It's like how to stop like your inner mind from like wanting certain things or like whatever. And I hear you. You're like, I'm tired. Like a healthy relationship sounds good. It's like, do you have to get to that point before you can want one?
Right.
Because it's like, what the fuck, dude? Like, I don't know. And it's like not even like with media and TV shows, but it's like the celebrity relationships that we see that are glamorized and they're horrible. It's like, it's just everywhere. And it's like, that's not fiction as far as we know. Like that's a real relationship. That's the parasocial relationships. People look up to you and they're having this, you know, really hard time and all of that. So that's confusing. I mean, it's always kind of just like, where do we go from here? But I do think like, exactly. Congrats to you if you watch this episode because educating yourself and thinking critically about why we're romanticizing these toxic behaviors is like the first step to changing and like unlearning that romanticization that we learned that starts when you're a child and you're hearing like, oh, he spit on you because he likes you. You know, you're a kid. You don't know anything. You're like, okay, mommy, like whatever. Like my mom never said that to me, but I was lucky. So a lot of it's confusing. A lot of it is. But I feel better.
Yeah, I think I'm the most confused about differentiating like fact from fiction as well and like whose responsibility it is to figure out how to do that because I don't think I did that. I don't think anything clicked in me till I watched that YouTube video and like I don't think many young girls that's going to click for them, especially without the education. So whose responsibility is that? How do we fix that? I don't know. Like, I think, again, it's like, okay, like, it's great that we're talking about this stuff with Colleen Hoover trending, book talk, all of that. Like, at least it's bringing more light to it to maybe, like, highlight these problems. But, like, same, I mean, even with the whole aspect of shame and, like, kink, because it's like, I feel like I can differentiate it in terms of, like, sexual fantasies, but then in, like, romantic relationships and then feeling shame that you didn't differentiate it. Like, that's a whole, like, spiral that you can go down. But overall, I'm confused about a lot of stuff in this episode. Same with you said, like, how to unlearn romanticizing this stuff. I mean, obviously, people would say, like, therapy, like, fucking medication, like all of the like learning, like all of those stuff, like the basic answers, but it's so much easier said than done. Also, is dark romance objectively bad? I want to say no, but maybe it can be depending on who's writing it. So it's like everything in this episode is so nuanced, and I want to like stress that this is not like a clip the conversation and like forget about everything else that we said because it's all on top of each other. And we will go back to it.
Yeah, I would love to see how it all ends with us. Could have been differently if you didn't have the merch situation and the Blake Lively horrors of marketing. Like I would love to have seen that because I think, and not putting a hotline. It seems stupid. It's like, oh, who's going to call it? But it's like, no, it's like a beacon of hope to be like, it could go differently for you. If, you know, you make that decision, like if you're capable, it's like there are resources out there. Like you're not alone. Like that's what it says, you know?
Yeah.
And like maybe
and
someone's
also,
literally
like,
in crisis watching. Like you don't know.
Someone could be watching, someone could be with their friend. It could be a friend who's watching their friend go through this, who is like previously blaming them and is like, oh, like here's a hotline. Like
and that movie
like,
changed their life. Like you don't know.
Like you really don't know, or at least have like a fun. Someone watches that movie and is it like Justin Baldoni had the fundraiser in his Instagram bio. And Blake Lively posted it once, but exactly like someone watches that movie. Imagine if they had put like a nonprofit or something like that where people are like, wow, this really resonated with me. I'm gonna go donate. That makes me want to put that in this episode. I think we'll do that.
Yeah, we should do that. We should definitely do that. But if you guys made it to the end of the episode, we absolutely love you. Make sure that you do subscribe on YouTube. I know we always say it, but we're so close to 1,000 and we really want to hit it soon. So please subscribe, like the video, comment below, keep the conversation going. This is definitely not the last time we're going to talk about these issues. But it is kind of the first. So like I said, we tipped our toe in and we're going to keep going. We hope you guys can continue that.
Dipped our toe.
Yeah, whatever, bitch. Tipped, dip. I know I always fuck up fucking phrases. Make sure you go follow on Spotify and Apple. We also got a community over there. You can check us out there. Rate us. Give us a written review. We would appreciate it so much. Thank you for listening.
Yes, we also do have listener support. It's 99 cents, $4.99, or $9.99 a month. It is in the bottom of the description of every single episode, no matter what platform you guys are listening. It is the only way that we currently make money from this podcast. And yeah, we love you guys so much. We hope you learned something, and we will catch you in the next episode. Bye!
Okay, I'm just gonna assume that this is gonna get censored, but in the odd chance that it doesn't, I really fucking hate censorship on TikTok. And I also really, hold out, trigger warning, for DV and SA and grape. I hate using the words DV, SA, and grape, okay? I want to say domestic violence, sexual abuse, sexual harassment, sexual assault, and rape. Why? Because I'm a domestic violence survivor, and it took me so long to even claim that term. And every time that I see it being censored online, all I can think is like, here we go again, like adding the shame to being a survivor of this stuff and making it even more difficult for us to have real conversations about prevention, about surviving, about healing, about awareness, all of that stuff. So I get why people do it. And as a creator myself who is not yet monetized on YouTube but wants to be, I consider it like, will it demonetize us if we use those words? But again, why the fuck should it? The content that we create is educational. It's meant to spark a conversation and build community. It is not meant in a violent way like a lot of this manosphere content that is and so often doesn't get censored, even though much more of it is censored now. But yeah, I don't know. This is just a rant. We did just do an episode of the podcast So Wet So Dry about sex education in America and how shitty it is and how a lot of it should include more topics of relationships, consent, all of that kind of stuff. And because of that, people are going to TikTok, but then they're getting censored. It's a whole mess. But if you guys want to check it out, my podcast with my best friend is called So Wet So Dry on all podcast platforms and YouTube. Well, if anyone knows ways to actually contact these platforms and see a way to fix this shit, like we should also be able to say lesbian, bisexual, etc., let me know. Let me know. I've already DM'd Instagram. I'm shadow banned. Not much success, but yeah, that's it. I'm actually gone now. Bye.